Lyn Shu awakened SSS-rank Sacrificer. Then powerful men tried stealing it. Their pressure reached his parents before his first career trial. Instead of surrendering, he sacrificed the SSS career itself. He also burned 99% of his maximum health. The gamble awakened EX-rank Fate Sacrificer. Every breath now permanently increased his maximum health. He spent that health upgrading a basic heal beyond its limit. The harmless support spell became a lethal defense, ignoring attack. Lyn Shu had lived once before, so reaching teen in this new life made the career awakening ceremony feel like his first real chance. His parents were ordinary C-rank factory workers, and their combined income barely covered a modest life despite years of steady labor. At Jiang No. 1 High School, more than 3,000 seniors gathered beneath the awakening array. While teachers processed students one after another, Lyn Shu entered with excellent academics, strong combat evaluations, and an A-rank potential rating that already placed him near the top. One classmate disliked that attention immediately. Li Hao, a wealthy bully whose resources and family connections had carried him far beyond his effort. Their feuds had started because Lyn Shu repeatedly stopped Li Hao from humiliating weaker students, making the rich kid treat him as an enemy. When Lyn Shu touched the awakening stone, its color climbed past ordinary grades until golden light filled the gymnasium and silenced the crowd. The result was the SSS-rank Sacrificer, a career able to permanently strengthen skills by paying with health, attributes, equipment, or other value. That talent sounded terrifying because every powerful improvement required an irreversible cost. But the rank itself promised national support and enormous potential. An SSS rank certificate could smooth progression for years, while the monthly subsidy alone exceeded anything Lyn Shu's working family had ever earned. As classmates celebrated around him, Li Hao quietly sent a message, turning Lyn Shu's breakthrough into a problem. Before the ceremony had even ended, Lyn Shu was popular because he shared study methods, helped classmates train, and had already taught himself a basic healing spell for sparring. Instead of receiving congratulations from the administration, he was summoned to the principal's office almost immediately after leaving the awakening stage. Principal Li Jianguo appeared polite behind his desk, yet Li Hao stepping from behind a screen made the real purpose of the meeting obvious. Li Jianguo first discussed the government subsidy, then claimed new policy changes made support for obscure careers uncertain, despite Lyn Shu's SSS rank. He followed that with fabricated complaints, accusing Lyn Shu of bullying classmates and forming a clique specifically to isolate Li Hao. The accusations were carefully chosen because Sacrificer already had a dangerous reputation, giving the principal an excuse to question Lyn Shu's eligibility. Once the pressure was established, Li Jianguo finally presented the real deal, a transfer agreement disguised as a voluntary career decision. Signing it would surrender Lyn Shu's subsidy eligibility and valuable SSS rank career certificate to a supposedly more suitable student. That beneficiary was Li Hao, and the principal tried presenting the theft as a practical compromise instead of a favor for his nephew. They offered 5 million as compensation, far below the value of 3 years of subsidy payments, much less the certificate itself. Lyn Shu refused, pointing out that someone with real legal authority to strip him would never need to bargain behind a closed office door. Li Jiantuo switched from persuasion to intimidation, reminding him that his parents were factory workers and suggesting money could buy them comfort. Lyn Shu understood the implied threat, yet knowledge from his previous life told him the coming policy reforms would not casually erase SSS holders. He rejected the agreement outright and warned that any suspicious death involving an SSS-ranked student would attract national attention they could not bury. His threat was calculated. If the Li family wanted to silence him, evidence about the dispute would surface and drag their entire network into scrutiny. Li Jianguo briefly released the pressure of a high-level professional, but Lyn Shu refused to lower his head even under that crushing aura. Li Hao lost control and shouted, only for his uncle to slap him twice and force an apology before the situation became legally dangerous. The principal burned the agreement and ended the meeting. But Lyn Shu recognized the gesture as evidence destruction rather than genuine retreat. His suspicion was confirmed outside when a teacher revealed that the school had already pulled his crazier train under the excuse of protection. Without that registration, Lyn Shu could miss the first official test that determined recognition, future opportunities, and whether higher authorities noticed his talent. The blockage was deliberately bureaucratic, keeping him trapped without giving him one obvious illegal act. he could challenge through a complaint. His mother called before he could decide what to do, excited that her son had awakened an SSS career and planning a family celebration. Lyn Shu hid the conflict during dinner because telling his parents would only make two hardworking people worry about enemies they could not confront. He spent the night staring at the ceiling, furious that the best awakening of his life had become leverage for someone else's greed. By morning, he stopped waiting for fairness and reviewed the alternative routes available to professionals, whose schools refused to support them. Corporate and team routes existed, but the individual route offered the cleanest chance to prove himself, without depending on school approval. Before entering dungeons alone, however, Lyn Shu needed to understand the actual limits of the Sacrificer career and the two abilities on his panel. His status showed level 1, 100 health, 100 mana, the SSS Sacrifice talent, and the basic healing spell he already knew. The career's obvious flaw was brutal. Gaining exceptional power normally meant consuming the user's own future until nothing valuable remained to pay. Looking at the talent description, Lyn Shu realized Sacrifice was itself an ability, which meant the career's logic might be turned back on itself. If greater cost created greater enhancement, then sacrificing the entire SSS career to strengthen FICE could produce a reward no normal user would attempt. The interface offered costs ranging from health and memories to emotions, skills, body parts, and even the career that had created the talent. Lyn Shu selected his SSS-rank Sacrificer career, together with 99% of maximum health, deliberately staking the harshest resources available. The old panel cracked apart as if the system itself could not contain the transaction, then shattered and rebuilt into a completely different interface. A new message announced the EX rank Fate Sacrificer, a level beyond anything Lyn Shu remembered hearing about across either of his lives. Its unique life echo talent permanently added 1 point of maximum health with every breath and could not be stolen, copped, sealed, or transferred. The health he had sacrificed began returning almost immediately because every breath raised the cap, proving the gamble had changed the career's core weakness. More importantly, maximum health was no longer just survival for Lyn Shu. It had become a renewable currency he could spend on permanent enhancement. He tested the idea by sacrificing 100 maximum health into his F-rank healing spell instead of saving every new point. The weak spell raced through its normal proficiency ceiling and began restoring 1,000 health per cast, roughly 100 times its previous effect. Lyn Shu continued paying health after the ordinary maximum, discovering that skills could break their recognized limits instead of stopping at mastery. The heal evolved into an EX rank version with instant recovery, sustained regeneration, and an overflow effect triggered when the target was already full. Overflow converted excess healing into defense, ignoring damage around the target, meaning Lyn Shu could injure enemies by casting healing on himself. One cheap support spell now produced thousands of damage while keeping him healthy, and life echoes steadily replenished the maximum health spent creating it. As Lyn Shu prepared to leave home, Li Jianguo and Li Hao were already discussing how to block every route outside the school system. Li Hao suggested direct force, but his uncle knew attacking an SSS holder openly would bring the Career Holder Association down on them immediately. Instead, Li Jianguo proposed using Lyn Shu's parents, arranging promotions first, and then manufacturing a costly workplace failure they could blame on them. That plan would create debt or criminal pressure large enough to force their son back to the bargaining table, without obvious violence. They also moved to obstruct corporate teams and ordered people around the dungeon system to watch for anyone willing to help Lyn Shu. While the Li family built a net around him, Lyn Shu entered the Joning City dungeon hall with abilities nobody there knew he possessed. 4 major dungeon projections dominated the building, ranging from the beginner goblin outpost to the notoriously dangerous Blood Moon graveyard. A shield knight briefly approached Lyn Shu for a team, then backed away the moment he heard the word Sacrificer and remembered its frightening reputation. Rumors claimed Sacrificers might drain teammates or trade away other people's vitality, so most rookies preferred avoiding them completely rather than checking facts. Lyn Shu did not argue. He sat aside, breathed to accumulate health, and listened while failed adventurers described how deadly the special dungeons had become. He watched a battered level 10 squad return from elite corrupted woodland, proof that even decent equipment and teamwork offered no guarantee of survival. That sight convinced him to begin with the permanent goblin outpost instead of forcing an unnecessary gamble on his very first dungeon. Li Hao arrived in new gear with several companions and loudly mocked Lyn Shu for having no certification, equipment, level, or teammates. The real purpose was social sabotage. Anyone considering Lyn Shu suddenly pulled away after Li Hao reminded them of the sacrificer's supposed risks. Li Hao privately urged him to stop resisting and accept the earlier agreement. Certain isolation would make the 5 million offer look attractive. Lyn Shu answered by registering a loan for Goblin Outpost, ignoring the clerk's recommendation that first-time professionals enter with a party. Inside the forest camp, his Fate Sacrificer panel already showed thousands of maximum health because he had been deliberately breathing throughout the day. A hidden goblin archer opened the fight with an arrow through his shoulder, adding bleeding but barely disturbing his enormous health reserve. 3 melee goblins rushed from different directions, giving Lyn Shu the perfect chance to test Overflow against moving enemies rather than training targets. When they crossed the healing aura, overflowing life force turned hostile, ripping through their bodies faster than the low-level monsters could react. Lyn Shu then threw the healing spell directly at the archer and confirmed the same principle worked offensively without needing enemies inside his aura. Once he knew ordinary goblins could not threaten him, the cautious beginner approach disappeared, and he walked directly through the camp. Every monster entering his range collapsed almost instantly, while distant targets could be removed by casting the EX heal directly on them. The Goblin Chieftain finally charged with a spiked club, but even the boss lost half its health after only moments inside Lyn Shu's aura. A final burst of overflowing life force killed the chieftain before its weapon could land, ending the dungeon without Lyn Shu taking meaningful damage. The system awarded an SSS clear rating for solo completion, full elimination, speed, and no damage while raising him from level 1 to level 5. His treasure chest contained a club, leather armor, and bone necklace, whose combined set bonuses finally gave him proper beginner equipment. Outside, the clear record drew attention because an unknown level 1 entrant had finished a beginner dungeon with a perfect result almost immediately. Lyn Shu treated the achievement as proof of concept rather than a climax, because his real still required stronger dungeons and official qualification. He sold or evaluated early loot, while comparing his growing health pool against the damage profiles of the harder instances available in the hall. The Wailing Mine became his next practical target because its monsters were dangerous enough to test him without the extreme risks of Blood Moon. Inside the mine, Spike Rats and their Healing King relied on numbers, ranged projectiles, and recovery mechanics that normally exhausted inexperienced teams. Lyn Shu's life-based damage ignored that intended attrition, allowing him to erase ordinary rats while continuously restoring whatever minor damage reached him. Against the Rat King, he used the same offensive healing logic at range, cutting through regeneration faster than the creature could stabilize its health. The successful clear pushed his level and resources higher, while teaching him that his EX healing spells scaled far beyond what its original grade suggested. More importantly, every dungeon minute gave Life Ek additional breaths. So combat itself increased the reserve he could later sacrifice into stronger abilities. By the time Lyn Shu returned to the hall, the powerless sacrificer Li Hao wanted isolated had already become a self-sustaining progression engine. The goblin equipment was useful only as starter capital, so Lyn Shu carried the full set out and began searching for better ways to convert loot into growth. At the market he met Sun Chunhua, an experienced professional who enjoyed repairing gear, understood obscure equipment, and immediately recognized the value of Lyn Shu's drops. Sun Chunhua offered a fair price for the complete goblin set, then became more interested when Lyn Shu asked to trade money for skill books instead. Their conversation showed Lyn Shu another advantage of dungeon success. Useful contacts could turn unwanted loot into exactly the abilities his strange career needed. Before leaving, he helped an old friend obtain inexpensive beginner equipment, refusing to let his own problems stop him from returning earlier favors. That friend mentioned something troubling in passing. Lyn Shu's parents had suddenly been promoted at the factories, despite never seeking management positions. The news sounded fortunate on the surface, but after the principal's threats, Lyn Shu immediately suspected family had started moving against his parents. He could not confront them without evidence, so he continued the dungeon route while keeping the promotion in mind as a possible trap. The Wailing Mine looked intimidating to ordinary parties because narrow tunnels ruined formations and allowed spike rats to ambush from cramped side passages. For a solo Fate Sacrificer, those same tunnels simplified everything. because enemies had to enter the range where his overflow damage was strongest. A receptionist named Wang Shaili had quietly given Lyn Shu a defensive scroll before entry, worried that a promising rookie might die chasing progress. She expected him to spend a long time inside, so his return shortly afterward made her assume the SSS had failed almost immediately. Instead, Lyn Shu placed an SSS-rated clear form on the counter and returned the untouched defensive scroll she thought might save his life. His time was even faster than the Goblin run, forcing Wang Shaili to realize the unknown sacrificer was not surviving through luck. She decided the dungeon hall should invest in him and let him keep the scroll, rather than treating the item as a wasted expense. Lyn Shu appreciated the gesture because it was the first institutional support he received after his school deliberately blocked his official career route. Sun Chunhua later explained the dungeon hall rankings, where exceptional clear records could earn passives, skills, and resources unavailable to ordinary rookies. The city board offered valuable rewards, but the Qinglan Continent board could provide higher grades and political attention strong enough to override local obstruction. First place was especially important because a continental champion received resource priority, making a school principal's attempt to bury one application almost meaningless. Lyn Shu immediately saw the strategic value. If official recognition could not come through his school, he would force the wider system to notice him. To chase those rankings, he needed more offense and more survivability. So soon Chunhua helped him locate several low-level skill books worth sacrificing health into. Lyn Shu enhanced Water Arrow far beyond its original grade, until the spell gained huge single-target damage and a sustained area attack called Arrow Rain. The upgraded spell finally gave him true ranged damage, reducing his dependence on walking enemies into a healing aura before they could be killed. He also enhanced Life Shield, a sacrificer skill that originally consumed current health to create temporary protection around the user. At EX rank, Life Shield generated enormous barriers, knocked enemies back when broken, and could inflict damage based on the opponent's current health. Its passive effect was even more valuable, automatically spending a portion of Lyn Shu's health and attacked to produce a shield without manual activation. While that shield existed, one control effect and one instant death effect could be ignored, covering exactly the kind of surprise that could end a solo run. Life Echo made those health costs sustainable, because the maximum pool kept expanding, while Lyn Shu's healing abilities restored current health during combat. With a ranged attack, lethal healing, and automatic defense, Lyn Shu finally possessed a complete early combat loop, rather than one overpowered trick. He returned to the dungeon hall, just as Li Hao was bragging about clearing normal Blood Moon Cemetery with a full party and expensive equipment. Wang Shaili openly mocked that achievement, pointing out how little it proved compared with the resources Li Hao had brought into the challenge. Li Hao turned the humiliation toward Lyn Shu, insisting a sacrificer who entered Blood Moon Cemetery would only discover how quickly he could die. Lyn Shu abandoned his plan to progress slowly through every dungeon and registered for Blood Moon Cemetery alone, while the entire hall watched. Wang Shaili approved the application because she had already seen 2 impossible SSS clears and knew his quiet confidence was backed by actual results. His friend offered to enter beside him after recovering, but Lyn Shu refused because the next test was meant to measure his own limits. So Blood Moon Cemetery opened under red mist, grave markers, buried corpses, and environmental effects designed to wear teams down before they reached the boss. The first corpse wave normally terrified rookies by erupting from multiple coffins, surrounding anyone who failed to control the battlefield immediately. Lyn Shu activated Arrow Rain over the graveyard and killed the ghouls before most could even finish climbing from the earth. Because his damage was massively above the dungeon's intended level, the opening encounter dissipated so quickly that the environmental pressure barely mattered. A spirit flame wraith attacked his mind next, but Life Shield absorbed the defense, ignoring mental damage, as if it were any ordinary hit. That confirmed another important rule. The barrier acted like a separate health layer against physical, magical, and mental attacks, rather than ordinary armor. Lyn Shu continued forward, while Blood Moon's healing and draining mechanics, terrifying to normal parties, failed to overcome his regeneration and oversized health pool. Dense undead formations actually favored him, because Arrow Rain and Overflow could damage many targets at once. Instead of forcing repeated single battles, he reached the boss area with most resources intact and used the same overwhelming damage cycle to erase the remaining undead before attrition could build. The clear rewarded him with multiple materials, a knight's greatsword, and an undead-related achievement that increased damage against enemies of that type. More importantly, the run finished so quickly that people outside assumed he had failed before the teleportation light even released him into the hall. Li Hao and the spectators were ready to laugh until the dungeon record updated and showed that Lyn Shu had actually completed the challenge. The result turned the earlier mockery into silence because a solo sacrificer had outperformed parties that entered with better gear and established combat classes. Lyn Shu did not stay to enjoy the reaction. He treated normal difficulty as preparation and immediately began considering the elite version. Blood Moon Cemetery's reputation came from stacked healing, life drain, mental pressure, and a curse that became worse the longer a team remained inside. Sun Chunhua warned that even strong professionals struggled there, especially once elite difficulty raised monster durability enough for those recovery mechanics to matter. Lyn Shu's answer was to strengthen the tools that bypassed attrition rather than simply raising ordinary damage and hoping the fight ended first. He used more renewable maximum health to improve Water Arrow, Life Shield, and his healing abilities, while Life Echo quietly replaced the spent reserve. The growth pattern looked suicidal to anyone watching only the Sacrificer's career description, because they assumed every enhancement permanently shortened his life. In reality, Lyn Shu's maximum health was increasing so quickly that the supposed permanent cost had become a resource he could deliberately budget. That hidden difference was why his public records kept improving, while observers expected each success to leave him weaker than before. He entered Elite Blood Moon Cemetery with enough damage to clear ordinary mobs rapidly, but the stronger curse finally produced more meaningful resistance. The elite undead survived longer, forcing Lyn Shu to combine Arrow Rain, Direct Water Arrows, Life Shield, and Overflow, instead of relying on one spell. He still moved aggressively because every second saved reduced the time the Blood Moon curse had to stack dangerous effects on his body. When negative status appeared, Lyn Shu began exploring whether sacrifice could enhance utility and resistance rather than only damage or healing. His unusual skill progression let him answer mechanics that normally required separate teammates, potions, or specialist classes to counter. Elite bosses that expected to heal through prolonged combat instead lost health faster than their recovery patterns could stabilize the fight. Lyn Shu's final clear time dropped into a ranged dungeon staff, normally associated with established prodigies, rather than someone awakened only one day earlier. The leaderboard update spread through the hall, and Director Wang began checking the rookie's file, because the records no longer looked like isolated accidents. Staff confirmed he had entered alone, removing the easiest explanation that a hidden high-level teammate had carried him through the dungeon. They also noticed that he emerged without the severe weakness expected from a sacrificer, repeatedly paying health or attributes for temporary bursts. That contradiction made Lyn Shu more valuable and more mysterious, especially because no official career trial had certified what his talent could actually do. Outside the dungeon system, Li Jianguo received the same leaderboard information and refused to believe the results meant Lyn Shu had escaped his control. He argued that sacrificer power always demanded a price, so the cost must simply be hidden somewhere the public could not yet see. Li Hao accepted that explanation because the alternative was admitting their supposedly trapped target had become stronger every time they tried to isolate him. The Li family kept blocking formal routes, while waiting for Lyn Shu's career to collapse under its own side effects. Lyn Shu instead used the records to earn more dungeon hall trust, better access, and increasingly valuable opportunities outside the school's reach. Sun Chunhua became a dependable equipment contact, buying unwanted drops and locating skills without asking Lyn Shu to explain every secret behind his growth. Wang Shali also continued helping with registration, recognizing that her job was to evaluate performance rather than repeat rumors about an unpopular career. Those small relationships mattered because Lyn Shu's enemies were trying to make isolation itself into a weapon that would force him back toward the transfer agreement. With money from repeated clears, he upgraded equipment and prepared for Nightmare Blood Moon, the difficulty most rookies discussed as if it were a death sentence. Sun Chunhua explained that Nightmare enemies healed aggressively, drained blood, and fought beneath a curse capable of breaking teams that survived the earlier stages. The low clear rate did not frighten Lyn Shu as much as the possibility that one unknown control mechanic could bypass his enormous health. He therefore invested in effects that or cleanse negative status, continuing to turn maximum health into permanent answers for specific dungeon threats. When Nightmare registration opened, the lobby gathered around because the same rookie had already produced multiple records in less than 2 days. Some spectators expected a miracle, while others were certain the Sacrificer's hidden cost would finally appear once Nightmare difficulty stopped forgiving mistakes. Lyn Shu ignored both sides and entered alone, treating the challenge as another experiment in understanding what an EX rank career could actually support. The Nightmare Blood Moon Curse arrived immediately, with heavier pressure, stronger undead, and environmental effects capable of punishing any delay. Lyn Shu used area damage to prevent the first corpse tide from forming properly, then advanced before enemies could combine their healing and control patterns. Higher health bars meant individual monsters survived long enough to attack, but Life Shield absorbed the dangerous opening hits without interrupting his casting rhythm. Each encounter taught him which mechanics could be overpowered directly and which required an enhanced skill designed to ignore the dungeon's intended rules. Against mental and status effects, Lyn Shu relied on newly strengthened utility, rather than sacrificing teammates or consuming expensive external items. His progression had effectively turned one person into a full party: damage dealer, healer, tank, cleanser, and control specialist inside the same build. Nightmare bosses finally forced him to use those roles together, rotating shields, healing, ranged attacks, and area pressure instead of simply walking forward. Even so, the dungeon finished far faster than analysts believed possible for someone at his level, and with no visible team support. When Lyn Shu returned, the clear time and rating triggered a much larger investigation inside the dungeon hall than his earlier records had caused. Director Wong compared logs and realized the pattern was consistent. The Sacrificer was not merely surviving dangerous content. He was accelerating through it. One explanation emerged among experts: a skill might have been pushed all the way beyond normal mastery into EX rank territory. That possibility was extraordinary, because even famous veterans rarely possessed abilities enhanced past the standard limits recognized by ordinary professionals. For someone awakened only yesterday to show such an effect suggested either an unknown talent interaction or a career rule nobody had documented properly. Lyn Shu kept the Fate Sacrificer secret, allowing observers to argue over incomplete explanations, while the public only saw impossible dungeon results. His growing ranking position also changed the practical balance with Li Jianguo, because higher RS authorities would soon have records what they could not locally suppress. Every clear produced experience, loot, skill access, and reputation at once, multiplying the value of the individual route the principal had failed to close. Li Hao had expected ridicule and isolation to push Lyn Shu into surrendering, but his interference instead created the pressure that drove the rookie into faster growth. By the end of the second day, Lyn Shu was no longer fighting merely for certification. He was becoming a public anomaly the city's institutions had to acknowledge. The normal Blood Moon record silenced the crowd, but Lyn Shu immediately requested elite difficulty, instead of allowing the achievement to become his stopping point. Even Wang Shaili hesitated, because Elite Blood Moon doubled enemy durability and added a curse that could destroy awareness before a slow team reached the bosses. Experienced players explained that mental corruption stacked every 30 seconds, creating hallucinations first and complete helplessness once enough layers accumulated. Elite teams normally carried priests or purification items, and even an SSS professional with high-ranked teammates needed more than 8 minutes. Lyn Shu entered without a priest, visible purification gear, or teammates, which made the monitoring staff focus on one impossible detail. His status bar showed no accumulating Blood Moon corruption, suggesting one of his enhanced abilities could erase or ignore a mechanic designed for entire parties. Inside, he kept the pace aggressive, using Arrow Rain to remove clustered undead, while Life Shield absorbed attacks that slipped through. Spirit monsters attempted mental shrieks, but the barrier treated those attacks like any other damage and prevented the control effect from reaching him. The elite route led to a stone bridge, guarded by twin bosses, a mounted Death Knight, and an enlarged Wailing Wraith, surrounded by ghost fire. Outside staff watched Lyn Shu enter that boss zone a little over 2 minutes after starting, faster than most strong teams cleared the opening sections. He eliminated the Wailing Wraith first, with sustained range damage, removing the boss most capable of stacking dangerous mental pressure. The Death Knight's mount collapsed under repeated water arrows. forcing the armored boss to continue on foot instead of controlling distance. One heavy sword strike finally shattered Lyn Shu's life shield, but breaking the barrier triggered its retaliation and blasted the Death Knight backward. That automatic punishment created another opening, letting Lyn Shu continue attacking before the boss could convert the broken shield into momentum. The fight ended in only a fraction of the time expected for Elite Blood Moon, with Lyn Shu leaving almost untouched. His final clear time was 3 minutes and 38 seconds, another solo SSS rating, and a record that looked completely unreasonable beside existing results. The dungeon hall grew silent when he returned clean, because the people waiting for a Sacrificer's collapse had instead watched 2 consecutive records disappear. Wang Shali registered the result with shaking hands, while the earlier mockers moved aside rather than trying to explain away another impossible performance. Dungeon Hall manager Xinjiang approached Lyn Shu personally, introduced himself, and admitted he had never seen a newly awakened professional clear like this. Zhang did not demand the secret behind the records, understanding that high-level talents often depended on information their owners could not safely reveal. Instead, he offered practical support and asked staff to watch Lyn Shu's future results, treating him as a talent worth protecting rather than exploiting. That response contrasted sharply with the school, where Li Jianguo interpreted the same records as a temporary sacrificer burst that must eventually consume its user. Li Hao was told not to challenge Lyn Shu directly, while the rookie's public reputation was rising, and too many outside institutions were watching. The principal still planned to manufacture additional complaints, creating paperwork that could justify withholding student status and certifications later. Their stronger pressure point remained Lyn Shu's parents, whose sudden factory promotions had placed them exactly where a fabricated financial disaster could hurt most. Lyn Shu learned more about that trap when a friend explained that factory management had shifted his parents into responsibility for operations they never controlled. A major loss was then blamed on them, producing a compensation demand of 3 million and threatening consequences impossible for an ordinary household to absorb. The timing confirmed the pattern. Every time Lyn Shu rejected the transfer agreement, another institution connected to the Li Lai family tightened pressure around his family. His friend offered testimony, but Lyn Shu knew local evidence could disappear when cameras, witnesses, and administrators were all controlled by people above them. Paying the debt alone would not end the problem either, because the Li family could simply manufacture another crisis until he finally surrendered. Lyn Shu therefore decided growth was the real solution. Once his public value exceeded their local influence, every attack on his family would become riskier. Money still mattered immediately, so he continued selling valuable dungeon materials and asked Sun Chunhua to help move equipment through channels outside the school. Sun Chunhua also proposed a larger opportunity. His sister's team needed one more damage dealer for Nightmare Blood Moon Cemetery. The offer included equipment and compensation regardless of success, showing how quickly Lyn Shu's records had changed other professionals' willingness to work with a sacrificer. Sun Chunhua's sister Sona was an SSS-rank Frost Empress battle mage, whose team had already built strong support around difficult dungeon content. Lyn Shu warned that he had never cleared Nightmare Blood Moon and refused to promise victory simply because elite difficulty had looked easy. Sun Chunhua accepted the risk, convinced that someone posting impossible solo times offered a better chance than repeating their previous failed approach. After scheduling the run, Lyn Shu returned to strengthening abilities and accumulating health rather than wasting time celebrating public attention. Shenzhong quietly ordered a background review, wanting to know why a potential continental-level talent was moving without school certification or official backing. That review began exposing the same contradiction. Everyone around Lyn Shu noticed. His achievements rose while the local education system kept placing obstacles in front of him. Li Hao, meanwhile, convinced himself the sacrificer must be burning hidden resources, because accepting unlimited growth would mean their entire strategy had already failed. His uncle reinforced that belief and told him to wait, expecting Lyn Shu's body, lifespan, or attributes to reveal the price after enough dungeons. Lyn Shu returned home carrying none of that confidence, because the factory scheme showed the Li family was willing to target people he actually cared about. He kept the details from his parents, while calculating how much cash, influence, and proof he needed, before confronting the people behind the setup. The next morning he met Sun Chunhua at the dungeon hall, where 3 additional teammates completed the 5-person nightmare party. John Hao and Li Yusan were S-rank priests, responsible for healing, cleansing, control, and the support mechanics Nightmare Blood Moon normally demanded. Sona arrived in high-grade ice blue equipment with a spear, carrying the damage reputation expected from an SSS-rank Frost Empress. Sun Chunhua served as the heavily armored front line, while Lyn Shu introduced himself simply as a sacrificer and allowed the others to judge the records. Zhang Hao reacted cautiously, because the class was famous for trading life for temporary output, making long-term reliability hard to trust. Sona had already studied Lyn Shu's elite clear and treated the strange career more seriously than its public reputation suggested. The team's first disagreement concerned damage responsibility, because Sona naturally assumed she would lead offense, fictitious, while Lyn Shu supported where needed. Sun Chunhua pointed out that Lyn Shu's elite time was faster than many complete teams, so ignoring that output would make the composition weaker. Sona reluctantly accepted Lyn Shu as the main damage dealer for the first attempt, promising to adjust if the real dungeon exposed limitations. Shen Zhang personally prepared 5 nightmare teleport passes and reminded them that no team on Qinglan continent had cleared that difficulty during the current cycle. Success would therefore create continental attention, exactly the kind of recognition Lyn Shu needed to escape the principal's ability to bury his career. The nightmare version amplified every Blood Moon mechanic while adding stronger enemies, harsher curse pressure, and bosses designed to punish weak coordination. Sun Chunhua admitted he hated the dungeon, but entered anyway because Lyn Shu's presence made the impossible challenge finally feel worth attempting. Lyn Shu did not share that optimism aloud. He treated the party as another chance to learn how his abilities interacted with real teammates. Once the team entered, the priests prepared cleansing and healing rotations, while Sun Chunhua took the first position expected of a conventional tank. Lyn Shu quickly disrupted that standard formation by deleting early monsters before they could create the sustained pressure the support line had prepared for. His arrow rain covered areas large enough to erase clustered undead, while Sona watched damage numbers far above what she expected from a sacrificer. When the team took minor damage, Lyn Shu's healing restored more than ordinary support spells, reducing the priest's workload without interrupting his own offense. Li Yusen used Mana Prayer to regenerate Lyn Shu's limited mana, and he immediately recognized why a coordinated team could improve his already strong solo build. With mana recovery supplied externally, he could keep enhanced spells active longer instead of choosing between damage output and resource conservation. Sun Chunhua enjoyed the opposite benefit. Monsters weakened or died before they could build the kind of pressure that normally shattered his defenses. Sona's initial skepticism turned into discomfort when Lyn Shu repeatedly removed threats she would have considered serious encounters for the whole team. That feeling eventually became relief, because being carried through a dungeon was far more pleasant. Once pride stopped demanding that every contribution look equal, the team advanced much faster than its previous attempts, and the monitoring timer outside began drawing attention as expected danger zones disappeared almost immediately. Nightmare Blood Moon still forced coordination where elite difficulty had not, especially when multiple boss mechanics overlapped instead of arriving one at a time. Sun Chunhua absorbed direct pressure, the priests maintained buffs and cleansing, Sona supplied control, and Lyn Shu concentrated his enhanced skills on decisive targets. A powerful Baron-type boss struck Sun Chunhua hard enough to split the skin on his hands and remove a large portion of his health. The hit proved nightmare enemies could still punish mistakes, even with Lyn Shu present, preventing the team from treating the run like a sightseeing trip. Lyn Shu answered by increasing damage instead of dragging the battle out, using the tank's brief control window to collapse the boss before another full exchange. Sona began understanding that Lyn Shu's real advantage was not one oversized spell, but the way a sacrificed enhancement removed a different combat limitation. The priests noticed the same pattern: healing, shielding, area damage, single target burst, and resistance all came from abilities that looked ordinary before enhancement. The run reached twin bosses in roughly 2.5 minutes, faster than many high-level parties could finish elite difficulty. Outside, Shenjiang watched the timer and realized the team was no longer merely attempting the first nightmare clear. It was threatening every known speed record. Inside, Lyn Shu coordinated with Sona instead of competing against her, using her control to create cleaner windows for his highest damage attacks. Sun Chunhua anchored the bosses, while Zhang Hao and Li Yusen kept the group stable through effects that would normally force a retreat. The first boss fell, then the second followed, before the dungeon's stacking environmental pressure could reach the point where cleansing became desperate. Clearing those encounters confirmed that Lyn Shu's abilities became more dangerous with competent support, because every saved second reduced resource costs for everyone. The party continued through nightmare sections none of them had previously seen, forcing them to adapt, without relying entirely on guide information. Lyn Shu used soul-related perception and control counters, where ordinary vision became unreliable, preventing the Blood Moon curse from turning teammates against each other. The support players followed his calls because the person with the clearest battlefield information had naturally become the center of the party's decision-making. Sona stopped measuring herself against Lyn Shu's damage and instead focused on freezing or positioning enemies, so his strongest abilities could end fights faster. That shift made the group dramatically more efficient, converting 5 individually strong professionals into a composition built around complementary roles. Nightmare Blood Moon finally ended with a successful first clear, breaking the Continental Cycle's untouched record and proving the earlier solo performances were not flukes. The achievement placed every member on the map, but the dungeon hall knew the decisive variable had been the Sacrificer, who joined only hours earlier. Sun Chunhua celebrated openly, while Sona gave Lyn Shu the kind of respect reserved for someone whose strength had already been demonstrated rather than advertised. Zhan Hao and Li Yusen also dropped their early suspicion, because no teammate had been drained, sacrificed, or harmed by working beside him. Instead, Lyn Shu had healed them, protected them, and carried damage, directly contradicting the theses that made sacrificers social outcasts. The clear produced valuable loot and ranking rewards, giving Lyn Shu more equipment to sell and more skills worth feeding with renewable maximum health. Sun Chunhua later pressed a substantial payment card into his hand and told him to use the money for whatever family problem he was facing. Lyn Shu resisted at first, but Sun Chunhua framed it as an investment in someone whose future was obviously worth far more than the temporary loan. That support mattered because the factory compensation issue was still hanging over Lyn Shu's parents, and the Li family expected financial pressure to break him. For the first time, Lyn Shu had enough cash and outside allies to address the immediate crisis without signing away his career rights. He thanked Sun Chunhua, while making clear that money could be repaid, but the favor itself would not be forgotten. The relationship stopped being a simple buyer and seller arrangement and became one of the first genuine alliances formed during Lyn Shu's forced independent route. At the same time, the Nightmare record pushed his name beyond Jiuning City, making every new attempt to suppress him more visible to higher authorities. The principal had tried to isolate one teenager. Instead, the pressure had driven Lyn Shu into records, allies, and resources faster than the official path ever might. Nightmare Blood Moon finished in 3 minutes and 12 seconds. A first clear so extreme that Shenzhong expected the record to survive for years. The lobby erupted when the party returned, yet many observers still assumed a sacrificer could only achieve Shroud by destroying his own future. Lyn Shu allowed the misunderstanding because revealing Fate Sacrificer would explain far more than he was willing to expose after 2 days of awakening. Sona approached him before leaving and offered future help, while Zhan Hao and Li Yusen added him as a contact without their earlier suspicion. The team had entered expecting a dangerous unknown, and left knowing Lyn Shu could protect allies while carrying damage at the same time. Sun Chunhua went further by treating the successful run as leverage, gathering documents about Lyn Shu's blocked certification and the pressure on his parents. He brought those records to his own family instead of trusting the same local channels that had already failed the new SSS professional. Sun Chunhua's father, Mayor Sun Lion, learned that a nationally valuable awakening had been denied certification and entangled in a convenient factory liability case. The mayor understood how disastrous the story would look if the public believed Jiuning City let private connections crush an SSS-ranked student. He launched an investigation immediately, not because Lyn Shu requested political favors, but because the city's own institutions had created a visible governance failure. By the time Lyn Shu met him, Mayor Sun Lion already knew about the Goblin, Wailing Mine, Blood Moon, and Nightmare records. The mayor bowed and apologized for the local government's failure, a gesture Lyn Shu had never expected from someone holding that level of authority. Sun Lion then produced a stamped SSS professional certification application, restoring the qualification Li Jianguo had tried to keep permanently out of reach. Another document suspended Principal Li Jianguo and opened an internal education investigation into the manipulations surrounding Lyn Shu's school records. A third report reversed the factory liability decision, after new testimony showed Lyn Shu's parents had not caused the costly accident blamed on them. Several pages of official paperwork erased problems that had felt impossible only days earlier, proving exactly why outside attention mattered more than local arguments. Lyn Shu still asked about Li Ya, the powerful business figure behind the factory and the broader family network supporting Li Jianguo. Mayor Sun Lyon did not pretend one administrative intervention could instantly remove every connection around a level 50 professional and major company chairman. Instead, he made clear that the city was watching, which prevented the Li family from continuing the same pressure openly without consequences. Lyn Shu accepted the practical result, knowing the best protection for his parents was still becoming important enough that attacking them created unacceptable risk. The Li family reacted badly as school forums, professional circles, and public discussion began exposing pieces of the suppression attempt. Li Jianguo was taken for questioning, while Li Hao followed his father's orders to say little and avoid creating more evidence. Li Ya remained calm in public, convinced Lyn Shu was still only a newly awakened student whose burst of attention could eventually fade. He planned to wait out the mayor's protection rather than directly challenge city authorities while the case was hot. Lyn Shu's parents resigned from the factory, removing the easiest institutional lever the Li family had used against them. Their freedom changed Lyn Shu's priorities from emergency survival toward long-term progression because one crisis no longer consumed every decision. His account now held several million from dungeon income, loot sales, team compensation, and rewards that would have seemed impossible before awakening. Lyn Shu was relieved, but professional life also taught him how quickly millions could disappear: equipment, consumables, and future progression. He continued treating money as a tool rather than proof of success, asking Sun Chunhua to search for healing abilities and high-value passive skills. The dungeon hall, meanwhile, prepared ranking rewards for the results Lyn Shu and its knight teammates had posted during opening days. Shen Zhang explained that the local reward pool contained several C-rank passives, all scarce enough to change how a young professional developed. Lyn Shu studied options such as agility, bloodthirst, and toughness, instead of automatically selecting whatever looked most expensive on the market. Toughness fit his build best because his maximum health grew rapidly, while natural recovery still lagged behind the amount he could spend through sacrifice. Faster regeneration meant more of Life Echo's growing cap stayed usable in combat instead of it becoming empty health that needed constant manual healing. Agility offered less because Lyn Shu increasingly preferred shields and overwhelming control to spending every battle avoiding individual attacks. Bloodthirst also had little value when one enhanced healing cast could restore far more health than ordinary life, steal from weapon damage. Shen Zhang approved the toughness choice and admitted the hall was granting access early so the team could prepare for the upcoming career trial. Sun Chunhua selected Bloodthirst for himself and secured another useful reward for Sona, strengthening the same group that had produced the Nightmare First Clear. Lyn Shu appreciated the exception because future content was escalating faster than the normal schedule for people who had awakened only days earlier. Discussion then shifted from city dungeons to the career trial itself, revealing that this year's test would be unlike the protected simulations older generations knew. The government planned to reactivate an abandoned astral battlefield, a real fragment left from earlier conflicts with otherworldly creatures. Dungeon monsters were not artificial training constructs. They were genuine beings trapped inside spatial fragments, governed by dungeon rules. The astral battlefield removed most of that protection, meaning participants could gain far greater rewards, but could also die permanently. Every trial taker would enter the same broader ruin, creating opportunities for cooperation, competition, discovery, and danger far beyond a school-administered examination. Officials believed alien races might be becoming active again, so the trial doubled as preparation for a generation likely to face real external threats. For weak careers, the battlefield offered a chance to reverse poor awakenings through rare resources for elites. It determined who deserved scarce national investment. Sun Chunhua warned Lyn Shu that an SSS awakening guaranteed baseline support, but the most valuable resources still required achievements, proving that potential in practice. That made the trial exactly the opportunity Lyn Shu needed. because performance there could permanently remove the shadow created by his school's earlier sabotage. He started planning around survival first, knowing that his offensive numbers meant nothing if an unknown battlefield mechanic bypassed his current defenses. Life Shield, enhanced healing, status resistance, and growing maximum health formed the core of that preparation. While he searched for more flexible skills, Lyn Shu also reviewed his team experience. Recognizing that mana prayer and cleansing support had dramatically improved efficiency, even when he could fight alone. The lesson was not that he needed permanent teammates for every battle, but that good support could convert his limited mana into far more sustained pressure. He therefore kept relationships with Sona, Sun Chunhua, Zhan Hao, and Li Yuxin active rather than treating the Nightmare Party as a one-time transaction. Outside combat, Mayor Sun Lion's investigation continued widening as officials traced who froze records, altered factory responsibility, and coordinated pressure on Lyn Shu. The more evidence appeared, the harder it became for Liya to frame the conflict as a simple misunderstanding between students and school administrators. Li Hao's earlier confidence faded because the people he expected to control now had to answer questions from authorities outside their family network. His father still believed patience would solve the problem, but every new record made Lyn Shu more expensive to threaten and harder to quietly remove. Lyn Shu did not chase personal revenge immediately, because spending his first weeks trapped in Cincel fights would only slow the power growth protecting his family. He chose to let officials handle documented misconduct, while he concentrated on becoming strong enough that future schemes that failed before reaching his parents. The next stage of preparation involved equipment, where Lyn Shu's new income finally allowed him to replace beginner pieces without draining every coin. Sun Chunhua used his market connections to locate items with health, mana resistance, and hidden utility, rather than simply chasing the highest visible attack number. Lyn Shu valued gear that multiplied his existing system, because extra health meant more sacrifice currencies, and extra mana meant more uses of enhanced skills. Accessories proved especially interesting when some pieces added hidden attributes such as luck and charm, rather than the usual combat statistics. Those effects reminded him that professional progression involved systems the public barely understood, making information almost as valuable as raw equipment grade. He invested selectively, while selling drops from repeated dungeon clears, keeping enough liquid money available for his parents and unexpected trial costs. The family situation improved enough that Lyn Shu could finally discharge his parents from medical care and take them away from the factory environment. Instead of returning them to their old apartment, he drove them toward a new home purchased with the money earned during his first days as a professional. His mother immediately worried about the cost, while his father understood that their son's life had changed faster than either parent could fully process. Lyn Shu downplayed the amount and focused on giving them a safe place where company officials or hostile managers could not casually reach them. The move was more than comfort. It removed another pressure point from the network Liya had relied on when targeting the family. With his parents settled, Lyn Shu could spend long periods training and running dungeons without constantly wondering what scheme might be happening at work. Life Echo kept functioning throughout ordinary life. So sleeping, traveling, talking, and eating all added maximum health without requiring a formal training session. That passive accumulation made every quiet day valuable because the next sacrifice enhancement could be funded partly by time that would otherwise produce no combat progress. Lyn Shu became careful not to spend health simply because he had it, ranking possible enhancements by how many future situations each one could solve. Skills offering only higher damage were less attractive than abilities combining offense, defense, control, information, or permanent passive effects. He also monitored his mana, since enormous health did not automatically solve the resource used to cast most enhanced mage abilities repeatedly. That limitation kept mana prayer and passive regeneration relevant, preventing his build from turning into a one-dimensional stack of maximum health. As the career trial approached, competitors across the region began preparing with family equipment, team training, rare consumables, and private information about the battlefield. Lyn Shu had fewer inherited resources, but his EX career let him permanently upgrade tools that richer students could only purchase at their normal limits. This difference made ordinary skill books disproportionately valuable to him, because low-grade abilities could become exceptional once enough maximum health was invested. Son Chunhua kept finding those books, while joking that Lyn Shu treated the market like a furnace that converted cheap inventory into impossible abilities. Lyn Shu never explained the full truth, but he rewarded fair dealing and made sure Sun Chunhua profited from the growing volume of equipment changing hands. That arrangement strengthened trust without requiring either side to know every personal secret, a useful model for alliances in a competitive professional world. Shenjing also became more open with information, partly because Lyn Shu's records improved the dungeon hall's reputation and justified earlier investment decisions. He warned that the trial's reward structure favored people willing to explore beyond obvious objectives, since the Astral battlefield contained abandoned resources and hidden dangers. Lyn Shu planned accordingly, intending to use enhanced perception wherever possible rather than follow crowds toward only the safest visible targets. His previous life gave him patience with long-term planning, but this world's systems still contained enough unknowns that arrogance could become fatal quickly. The Nightmare Run had already shown one useful principle. Strong mechanics mattered more than raw strength when the right ability directly countered an enemy's design. He wanted that same flexibility before entering a battlefield with no reset button, no guaranteed rescue, and enemies created outside normal dungeon restrictions. Meanwhile, policy discussions around professional subsidies continued, confirming Lyn Shu had been right that SSS holders were not simply being erased, as Li Jianguo claimed. The supposed reform threat had been exaggerated specifically to make him sign away valuable rights while he was still inexperienced and isolated. Official confirmation deepened the case against the principal, though Lyn Shu cared more that the lie could no longer be used against another student in the same way. Li Hao's position at school also weakened, because witnesses who once stayed silent became less afraid after the principal lost immediate authority. Former incidents involving bullying, false reports, and administrative favoritism began surfacing, widening the investigation beyond Lyn Shu's personal dispute. The change showed how quickly fear could disappear once a powerful protector stopped looking untouchable, a lesson Lyn Shu remembered for future conflicts. He still refused to rely entirely on officials, because Li Ya remained wealthy and strong enough to create problems through channels outside education. Progress, therefore, remained his safest insurance, and every approaching trial objective became another chance to widen the gap between himself and local enemies. By the time final preparations began, Lyn Shu had certification, money, allies, upgraded skills, and a family no longer trapped inside the factory. None of those gains came through the route designed for him. All had been forced open after. The school tried to close every legitimate door. The next test would decide whether that improvised path could survive a real battlefield, where influence mattered less than what a professional could actually do. Before the trial, Lyn Shu discovered sacrifice could consume an existing skill to strengthen another, meaning earlier investments did not have to become wasted progression. He tested the concept by feeding Water Arrow into Frost Nova, choosing to trade one replaceable spell for a broader control-focused combat foundation. The fusion created stronger ice spikes and a large frost domain that damaged enemies continuously while slowing everything caught inside its range. Because the new ability inherited useful effects from the sacrifice spell, Lyn Shu realized future skill building could be planned around combinations instead of isolated upgrades. Cheap abilities could therefore serve as foundations, later becoming fuel for higher-ranked skills whose final direction he could influence through sacrifice. That possibility made his EX career even more valuable than simple stat growth, since permanent mistakes in skill selection were no longer necessarily permanent. Sun Chunhua, meanwhile, found Lyn Shu a stronger healing spell, Radiant Shroud, chosen specifically for straightforward recovery rather than flashy secondary effects. Lyn Shu enhanced it to EX rank, gaining huge instant healing, sustained regeneration, full negative effect cleansing, and the familiar Overflow attack on full targets. The upgraded heal restored 5,000 health immediately and continued recovering health for a full minute, dramatically improving his ability to refill large health pools. It also solved another trial problem by cleansing status effects without requiring a priest beside him every time an unknown debuff appeared. Sun Chunhua and Sona visited Lyn Shu's new home before the trial, bringing in gifts while his parents treated them like ordinary young friends. The relaxed dinner gave Lyn Shu's family a rare moment away from lawsuits, dungeons, and officials during the fastest-changing week of their lives. Afterward, he reviewed the gear carefully and kept pieces that improved health, spirit resistance, mana, and survivability rather than chasing appearances. Trial analysts outside continued predicting that Lyn Shu's repeated clears must have burned enormous portions of his life, health, or attributes. The misconceptions spread because the public only knew ordinary sacrificers whose spectacular moments usually came with visible permanent losses afterward. Nobody watching those records knew Lyn Shu'd replenish maximum health simply by breathing, making every assumption about his cost structure fundamentally wrong. On trial day, the dungeon hall filled with teams carrying family gear, private strategies, and expectations built from the previous day's public rankings. Lyn Shu's party received Team Token number 1 because its members occupied the strongest combined position on the local boards. The first team trial destination was Ghost Fortress, a 3-hour survival challenge where kills generated points and teams could voluntarily raise difficulty after each clear. The rules contained one important warning. This trial offered no ordinary dungeon revival protection, so death meant elimination rather than a harmless reset. That single sentence quieted many rookies, but Lyn Shu stepped into the teleportation light without hesitation, and his 4 teammates followed. Across Qinglan Continent, Association headquarters monitored every city through giant ranking screens, tracking kills, points, difficulty, and team progression in real time. Chairman Jiang Hian, a level 70 veteran, personally watched the strongest teams because this trial was meant to identify resources worth long-term national investment. Ghost Fortress appeared straightforward at first, with phantoms filling streets and ruined structures inside an abandoned inner city. Lyn Shu activated soul perception, spreading awareness across the area until enemy positions, health, type, and movement became clear inside his mind. That information let the team skip inefficient searching and move directly toward dense groups, while avoiding routes that offered poor points for time spent. Frost's domain then turned the surrounding streets into a killing field, slowing phantoms and dealing continuous damage before they reached the front line. Sona used the slowed targets to strike cleanly, while Sun Chunhua discovered he had less tanking work because enemies entered combat already weakened. Zhan Hao and Li Yusen maintained cleansing, buffs, and mana support, preventing Lyn Shu's sustained area control from draining his resources too quickly. Headquarters initially focused on the party's extreme kill speed. Then Chairman Jiang pointed out that Ghost Fortress Ghost punished exactly the aggression. Once every phantom death normally added resentment, and excessive stacks could drive professionals into bloodlust before eventually turning them into phantoms themselves. Rational teams therefore paced kills around cleansing windows, which made Lyn Shu's non-stop elimination rate look less impressive and more suicidal. Staff checked Team 1's resentment data, expecting dangerous accumulation, and found every member sitting at 0 instead. The results stunned headquarters because even constant priest cleansing should not normally erase resentment perfectly. While kills arrived every few seconds, Lyn Shu's EX rank cleansing effects had quietly removed the dungeon's central limiting mechanic, letting the party push at a speed normal strategies could not copy. Once he mapped the inner city with soul perception, he identified the lord controlling the normal difficulty fortress and directed the team straight toward it. Normal mode ended rapidly, giving Team 1 enough points to take first place without showing the kind of exhaustion expected from such aggressive pacing. Lyn Shu immediately chose the next difficulty because remaining on safe content would waste both time and the advantage created by his unusual counters. Elite Ghost Fortress increased enemy attributes and added stronger commanders, forcing the team to coordinate rather than relying entirely on passive domain damage. Sona locked the elite commander in close combat, intentionally freeing Lyn Shu to control the surrounding mobs and prevent them from overwhelming support players. The commander's mental roar finally created a meaningful debuff, giving Jin Hao a chance to cleanse the entire party instead of feeling like unnecessary decoration. Li Yusen layered mana and damage buffs onto Lyn Shu, extending the frost domain while giving his ice spikes enough power to finish weakened elites quickly. Sun Chunhua handled stragglers with shield to control, turning what had once been a defensive role into cleanup inside a battlefield Lyn Shu already dominated. The elite commander reached roughly half health under Sona's pressure before Lyn Shu redirected attention and ended the encounter with precise ice spikes. Elite difficulty cleared with Team 1 still healthy, raising the score to a level that widened the gap over most other cities. Sun Chunhua wanted to continue immediately, and Sona refused rest because the team had barely been forced to use its full resources. Lyn Shu checked health and mana, then approved Nightmare difficulty, without displaying either excitement about the ranking or fear of the higher stakes. Headquarters became more interested because Nightmare Ghost Fortress had historically broken elite teams through battle formations, rather than simple monster statistics. The new Phantoms could recover past life memories and organize into coordinated formations that reduced incoming damage while strengthening every member inside. Previous challengers, usually answered by brute force, suffered heavy casualties or failed after spending every high-rank skill on a formation that refused to break. Lyn Shu approached the problem differently, treating the formation itself as a system whose structure could be disrupted rather than a wall that needed bigger damage. Frost domain spread through the battlefield, but the organized Phantoms resisted more effectively than ordinary mobs and pushed back against the environmental control. Soul perception let Lyn Shu observe positions across the entire formation, instead of judging only the enemies directly visible in front of him. He noticed how commanders, support Phantoms, and outer units shared protection, revealing that the formation's strength depended on coordinated placement rather than one invincible core. Sona and the others followed his calls, attacking specific points instead of wasting skills against whatever enemy happened to stand closest. When a gap opened, Lyn Shu used his physical strength and defensive abilities to enter the structure, rather than remaining outside trading ranged attacks. The decision looked reckless to observers, until breaking the formation from inside disrupted the shared bonuses, protecting the Phantoms around him. Once those bonuses disappeared, Frost's domain and the team's ordinary attacks became effective again, turning an impossible wall back into separate enemies. Association veterans, watching the feed, realized Lyn Shu had solved a formation that had defeated talented challengers without sacrificing a teammate or burning rare consumables. The success mattered more than raw damage because it showed battlefield judgment, adaptation, and willingness to question the intended solution instead of copying older clears. Nightmare enemies became more dangerous after the formation broke, but they could no longer distribute damage efficiently or coordinate as one protected unit. Lyn Shu controlled the center while Sona struck exposed targets. Sun Chunhua blocked pressure, and the priests kept the party free from lingering mental effects. The team continued advancing until the system announced Nightmare Ghost Fortress cleared and raised their score far beyond the continent's ordinary trial pace. Headquarters fell silent around the image of Lyn Shu, standing among frozen battlefield remains, after nearly carrying the dungeon's hardest mechanics himself. The trial then offered hell difficulty, adding massive attribute increases, 3 elite affixes, and a warning that nobody on Qinglan continent had ever cleared it. Hell also kept the same permanent death rule, removing any illusion that the next attempt was simply another record chase, with no real consequence. Lyn Shu checked that his health and mana had recovered while his teammates, though tired, remained capable of continuing if they chose. Sun Chunhua immediately agreed, saying he had already followed Lyn Shu through Nightmare and saw no reason to stop before the final challenge. Sona's competitive pride pushed her forward as well, while Jin Hao and Li Yusen decided reaching Hell was already rare enough to justify one more attempt. Sishu accepted their choices, but entered knowing that the same strategy could not simply be repeated against enemies, now carrying additional lethal affixes. Hell Ghost Fortress opened with Phantoms, strong enough that individual mobs resembled bosses from the earlier difficulties. Killing them carelessly also triggered dangerous effects, including explosions and resentment interactions, capable of punishing anyone who treated the fight as ordinary farming. Sona destroyed one Phantom only for its corpse to detonate, escaping serious injury because Lyn Shu warned her the instant soul perception detected the change. Zhan Hao used control that forced another Phantom's motion against itself, while Li Yusen supported the team through buffs rather than relying solely on healing. Even coordinated, the party required real effort to kill only a few enemies, and dozens more were already moving through the mist toward them. Despair spread across the others until Lyn Shu stepped forward alone, using the same calm voice he had carried through every earlier escalation. Soul perception mapped each Phantom's position and weak point, letting him reduce enemies near death, without always taking the final hit himself. That control mattered because Hell's affixes made the timing and ownership of kills almost as important as the amount of damage dealt. Lyn Shu ordered the team to follow his pace, turning a swarm into a sequence of controlled engagements instead of one chaotic battle. Frost Domain slowed the field while his ice spikes damaged selected targets, creating openings for Sona and Sun Chunhua to finish enemies safely. The priests used their remaining mana to cleanse, bind, and support exactly when Lyn Shu's information showed a mechanic about to become dangerous. Gradually, the party advanced through enemies whose individual strength could have overwhelmed ordinary rookie teams long before the first major objective. Their equipment deteriorated and stamina fell, but the shared structure kept casualties at 0, while points accumulated at a rate headquarters considered unbelievable. Lyn Shu's health pool absorbed the cost of life diversion and shields, while toughness restored enough between exchanges to keep the build sustainable. By the time the final commander appeared, Sun Chunhua's shield and armor were badly damaged, and both priests had nearly exhausted their mana. Sona was still fighting on willpower, making it clear the team had reached the limit where continuing together would create unnecessary deaths. Lyn Shu ordered everyone else to leave after reducing the remaining phantoms, refusing to turn a leaderboard record into a reason his allies died. Sun Chunhua accepted and used a teleport scroll, followed by John Hao and Li Yusen after spending their final mana on one last set of buffs. Sona resisted longer, but Lyn Shu made clear that the final commander was now a mechanics problem, better handled by his health-based build. Once alone, he relaxed because a single boss was easier for him to calculate than dozens of affixed mobs threatening exhausted teammates. The commander opened with a heavy sword strike that shattered Life Shield, and finally dealt visible damage directly to Lyn Shu. Breaking the shield retaliated for a huge portion of the boss's current health, immediately revealing how effective the mechanic became against high-health enemies. The monitoring room finally saw Lyn Shu's own health bar and discovered a rookie with well over 100,000 maximum health. That number explained why attacks that worried veteran observers barely changed his posture and why sacrificing health had not produced visible weakness. They still did not understand Life Echo, so the impossible health pool created more questions than answers about how a sacrificer could remain physically stable. Lyn Shu deliberately recast Life Shield, using the commander's damage to trigger repeated reflection, while his own healing repaired the health spent, generating protection. He mixed ice spikes into the rotation, reducing the boss between shield breaks instead of waiting passively for retaliation to do all the work. The duel became a cycle of shield, impact, recoil, healing, and frost damage that favored the professional, whose health functioned as both defense and currency. Hell's final commander could threaten ordinary tanks with every swing, yet each successful hit against Lyn Shu also accelerated its own defeat. What began as a team survival trial had become the clearest demonstration, yet that Fate Sacrificer turned enemy pressure into another resource Lyn Shu could exploit. Lyn Shu eventually defeated the Hell Commander through repeated shield retaliation and frost pressure, completing a difficulty nobody on Qinglan continent had cleared before. Team 1 finished with 24,700 points, more than 10 times second place, turning the entire regional ranking into a one-team landslide. The result stunned the dungeon hall because Lyn Shu walked out nearly spotless, while his exhausted teammates looked like survivors of the battle everyone expected. Shenzhong openly celebrated the first Hell Clear in continental history and immediately reported upward that the city had produced an extraordinary professional. Lyn Shu returned some of that credit to Xinjiang, strengthening a relationship with the manager, instead of acting as though every success came from nowhere. Headquarters requested Lyn Shu's complete file, including clear records, physical condition, equipment, attributes, and skill information that could reveal how he developed. Xinjiang did not hand over personal data automatically. He told Lyn Shu what was being requested and left the decision with the person who owned it. A medical examination created another mystery, because Lyn Shu showed no hidden injuries, life depletion, or physical collapse expected from repeated sacrificer enhancement. Zhang quietly acknowledged that professional systems still contained unknown rules and offered to protect whatever information Lyn Shu chose not to disclose. Lyn Shu shared enough public performance data to keep institutional trust without exposing Fate Sacrificer, Life Echo, or the exact mechanism behind his health. The trial rewards reflected the scale of the achievement, beginning with equipment far above anything Lyn Shu had owned during his first dungeon run. One chest produced a wraith cloak with survival effects useful on the astral battlefield, where one unexpected lethal attack could end a life permanently. Another contained an astral ring that increased mana reduced cooldowns, and granted additional attributes specifically while fighting inside the astral battlefield. The third delivered an A-rank Necromancer greatsword with huge strength and strong bonuses against undead or wraith enemies. Lyn Shu expected to sell the sword until his equipment interface accepted it, revealing Sacrificer was not restricted to conventional mage equipment. Equipping the weapon flooded him with physical strength and confirmed that his career could build across multiple combat roles, rather than follow one class template. The biggest reward was an SSS-rank skill book, a random prize valuable enough that even major families would treat the result as strategic property. It opened into Undying, a passive skill that raised all 4 core attributes, increased maximum health, and automatically prevented one fatal outcome on cooldown. Undying also allowed active health burning for a temporary attribute boost, giving Lyn Shu another way to convert his oversized vitality into direct combat power. The skills demanded far more sacrifice than low-rank abilities. But Life Echo made a cost measured in tens of thousands of health mathematically possible. Lyn Shu spent enough maximum health to raise Undying to its limit, doubling core attributes and improving both the death prevention effect and active boost. At maximum rank, Undying could multiply his attributes several times through health expenditure, turning a nominal mage into a terrifying close combat threat. That same night, Liya finally accepted that waiting was no longer safe after seeing Lyn Shu's trials and the overwhelming damage contribution behind it. He told Li how their earlier pressure had passed the point where apology could reliably end the conflict, especially after involving Lyn Shu's parents. Liya viewed Lyn Shu through his own ruthless worldview and concluded that someone capable of reversing this situation would eventually retaliate if allowed to grow. Instead of backing away, he contacted an old killer named Old Mo and ordered a clean assassination during the upcoming individual tournament. Old Mo recognized the danger of targeting an SSS professional with a historic trial record and demanded 5 times his usual price regardless of success. Liya accepted because the Astral battlefield offered an environment where death could be blamed on monsters, rival professionals, or ordinary trial danger. Lyn Shu knew none of this when Xinjiang called him back to collect an unusually generous set of regional ranking rewards. Qinglan Continent offered 3 S-rank passives and allowed him to choose, a level of flexibility rarely given to a newly awakened professional. Spirit Windstride improved movement, while Arcane Resonance increased mana and reduced cooldowns, both strong choices for ordinary ranged professionals. Lyn Shu rejected them because his build already solved movement through control and mana through life diversion, making their benefits less important to him. The third skill, Overlord's Disarm, checked whether his health and strength exceeded the targets whenever he dealt damage. Higher health granted a huge damage increase, while higher strength allowed attacks to ignore a significant portion of the enemy's defense. For most professionals, the conditions were unreliable, but Lyn Shu's enormous health and undying boosted strength made both checks likely to trigger constantly. Xinjiang questioned why a mage wanted a warrior-oriented passive until Lyn Shu chose it without hesitation and explained only that it fit his build. The selection showed how far his development had moved from standard career logic. Conventional labels mattered less than interactions between permanent effects. With the individual tournament approaching, the government lifted the level cap and encouraged competitors to reach level 20 before entering the astral battlefield. Zhang had already reserved a suitable nightmare dungeon, Rotwood Forest, where dense monster populations could satisfy the promotion requirements efficiently. Other professionals waited in a long entrance line, but Lyn Shu received priority because historic trial results at TOS had turned access into an institutional investment. Wang Shaili answered complaints simply. Anyone who cleared Hell difficulty could earn the same treatment instead of pretending all achievements deserved identical access. Rotwood Forest greeted Lyn Shu with poisonous mist, corrupted vegetation, and diseased treants, whose bodies were built around rot-based area damage. His regeneration outpaced the environmental drain, so he focused on testing Frost Domain and Ice against monsters, rather than managing the passive hazard. Corrupted treants froze before their blisters could rupture, making frost control especially effective against enemies that depended on close-range biological effects. Lyn Shu briefly considered testing melee, then decided the creatures were disgusting enough that ranged frost magic was the more appealing experiment. He pushed rapidly through dense packs, taking advantage of the dungeon's high monster count to accumulate experience and promotion progress in one run. A massive corrupted overlord waited deeper inside, offering the kind of high health target needed to test Overlord's disarm under real combat conditions. Lyn Shu attacked and immediately triggered the health comparison, confirming his vitality exceeded the boss and sensing, granting the passives extra damage. The strength check also succeeded after Undying's bonuses, allowing his attacks to pierce defense that would normally protect a creature of that size. Watching both conditions activate convinced Lyn Shu that the supposedly warrior passive had been one of the best possible rewards for Fate Sacrificer. The boss collapsed quickly under frost and amplified damage, completing the requirement Lyn Shu needed for the level 20 breakthrough. His growing physical attributes also made weapon combat increasingly realistic, even though spells remained the fastest way to clear large monster groups. Reaching level 20 unlocked new attribute growth and widened the range of skills or equipment he could safely use before the tournament. Lyn Shu spent the remaining preparation period balancing stats instead of specializing completely, because Undying and his mixed combat style rewarded broad development. Life Echo continued adding maximal every day, while his improved constitution changed breathing rhythm, enough that the growth rate became another variable to track. Even when not deliberately breathing faster, the passives still added tens of thousands of maximum health over time, preserving its role as the engine of his build. He treated that health as stored potential, not a number to display, because every future EX enhancement could consume a large portion without warning. The individual tournament eventually opened at a tower packed with media officials, families, and young professionals from across Qinglan continent. Sun Chunhua arrived in polished armor, and Sona carried her spear, while Jin Hao and Li Yusen attended without competing because their priest damage was limited. The event carried more than ranking prestige. Officials expected the abandoned battlefield to reveal how this generation behaved under genuine danger. Contestants entered separately through an awakening array that transported them across different starting positions inside the enormous astral battlefield. Li Hao approached Lyn Shu before entry, mocked the health cost he assumed every achievement required, and casually patted him on the back. Lyn Shu allowed the contact, then noticed the exact spot, and quietly understood that the gesture had probably placed something on his clothing. Li Hao walked away believing the tracker had been planted successfully, while Li Ya immediately sent confirmation to Old Mo. Outside the public arena, Lyn Shu stepped into the teleportation array without removing the device, deciding that a tracker could become bait for whoever believed he remained unaware. The astral battlefield opened beneath a purple sky covered by aurora, with broken stone, ancient weapons, and mountains formed from the bones of past armies. The system gave contestants 72 hours, converted monster kills into attribute gains, and repeated the warning that death on this battlefield was permanent. Lyn Shu struck one enormous rib and discovered ancient remains strong enough that even his enhanced physical power could barely damage the bone. Scattered equipment and wounds on the dead showed this place had once held a real war rather than a carefully designed dungeon encounter. Soul perception reacted to the battlefield, letting Lyn Shu sense lingering fragments and memories attached to fallen warriors as he moved deeper. The first undead enemies were not anonymous monsters to him. Killing them released broken impressions of the people or creatures they had once been. One memory showed fighters holding a line against alien enemies, giving the abandoned bones context that a normal status panel could never provide. Another belonged to a young warrior who charged a swarm so companions behind him had a chance to survive or complete their objective. Lyn Shu paused long enough to place a broken weapon beside the remains, acknowledging that the battlefield's rewards were built on people who actually died there. Similar fragments appeared from skeleton archers, phantoms, broken golems, and soldiers whose final moments showed different pieces of the ancient invasion. The memories transformed the trial from a competition into evidence that the foreign threat officials warned about had already devastated earlier generations. Bone mountains stretched across the horizon, making the casualty scale impossible to dismiss as exaggerated history taught for political effect. Lyn Shu continued collecting points and attribute gains while using soul perception to choose efficient routes through the ruins. The ability detected enemies beyond normal sight and let him distinguish ordinary monster groups from suspicious human movement approaching his position. Instead of avoiding the incoming threat, he chose a clearing and waited, leaving Li Hao's tracker exactly where the assassins expected to find it. A group eventually arrived with Li Hao among them, confirming that the school feud had escalated from sabotage into an attempted killing on a real battlefield. Lyn Shu removed the tracker and tossed it down, revealing that their surprise attack had been compromised before the first weapon was drawn. Li Hao ordered the hired professionals to attack anyway, believing numbers, specialized roles, and the battlefield's lack of witnesses could still solve the problem. Frost Domain instantly covered the clearing, slowing berserkers, exposing an assassin, and disrupting the distant elementalist before the formation could develop. Lyn Shu killed the ranged caster first with an ice spike, removing the person most capable of punishing him while he handled the melee attackers. A berserker tried forcing through the slow with a speed skill, but reshaped frost trapped his feet long enough for another ice spike to finish him. An assassin appeared behind Lyn Shu and discovered that enhanced agility, perception, and physical strength made the supposed mage almost impossible to surprise. Lyn Shu used spacing precisely, allowing attacks to miss by the smallest useful distance instead of wasting movement through dramatic evasions. The remaining killers quickly realized their target possessed both stronger magic and better close-range statistics than the profile used to plan the ambush. Li Hao's confidence collapsed as the people brought to kill Lyn Shu disappeared one after another, without forcing him into visible desperation. Lyn Shu kept Li Hao alive long enough to understand the scale of the betrayal, rather than treating him like another anonymous battlefield enemy. The confrontation confirmed Li Hao had crossed from harassment and fraud into conduct, capable of justifying lethal self-defense under battlefield rules. Before Lyn Shu could finish every loose end, Soul Perception detected another dangerous professional approaching with far better concealment than Li Hao's companions. That arrival matched what he expected from the tracker scheme. The obvious group had been expendable pressure, while the real assassin waited for a cleaner opening. Lyn Shu prepared without revealing everything he had sensed, allowing the hidden killer to believe surprise remained possible. The battlefield around them still contained distant patrol officers and contestants, creating witnesses if the assassin exposed enough information during the fight. Lyn Shu decided survival alone was not sufficient. He wanted the person behind the contract identified in a way authorities could later verify. Old Mo finally entered range, expecting to kill a talented student, unaware the target had already reconstructed the attack from the tracker and surrounding movement. The individual tournament had now become more dangerous than its monster scoreboard suggested, because Lyn Shu was fighting a private assassination inside a national trial. For the first time since awakening, the enemies in front of him were not dungeon creatures or corrupt administrators, but professionals who had deliberately come to end his life. Old Mo proved far more dangerous than Li Hao's hired group, using a special assassin class, advanced movement, and survival tricks designed for professional killing. Lyn Shu let the veteran commit first, studying attack rhythm through soul perception, while keeping the exact distance needed to make each strike miss. The assassin gradually realized the student was controlling spacing deliberately, because every failed blade stopped just short instead of missing by panic or luck. When Old Mo changed patterns, Lyn Shu answered with frost control, enhanced physical strength, and information the killer never expected a sacrificer to possess. Overlord's disarm and undying turned close-range exchanges completely against the assassin, whose experience could not compensate for the raw stat difference. Lyn Shu eventually overwhelmed Old Mo, disabled his ability to continue fighting, and kept him conscious because the identity of the employer mattered more than another kill. Patrol officers were already monitoring nearby, so Lyn Shu intentionally questioned the assassin where witnesses and recording systems could capture the exchange. Old Mo refused to confess directly, understanding that naming his employer would remove the last reason Lyn Shu had to keep him alive. Lyn Shu changed tactics by implying someone had betrayed the assassin's route, skills, and substitutability before the fight even began. The suggestion made Old Mo blurt out Li Ya's name while reacting to the possibility that his employer had sold him out. That one mistake created the evidence Lyn Shu wanted, allowing him to end the fight, knowing the contractor had effectively identified himself. Monitoring headquarters sealed the footage afterward because the battle exposed too much about Lyn Shu's abnormal physical statistics and sacrificer potential. Chairman Zhang Hian also recalled the patrol team assigned to shadow him, deciding the contestant no longer needed protection from ordinary battlefield threats. The broader trial situation became more urgent, as cultists connected to alien races began appearing across multiple sectors of the astral battlefield. Officials had intentionally left openings to expose infiltrators, but the scale of the response threatened contestants, who were never meant to become expendable bait. Jiang Hian ordered patrol units to eliminate the remaining heretics aggressively while continuing to prioritize the lives of young professionals caught outside safe routes. The cult responded by escalating its own ritual, sacrificing followers and opening more rifts rather than retreating after the first infiltration groups were destroyed. A battlefield-wide emergency notice offered contestants a choice: leave through teleportation or stay voluntarily and help fight the large-scale heretic invasion. Those who remained could earn bonus points, soul fragments, and qualification for a classified special unit handling internal investigations and external suppression. Lyn Shu saw the resource opportunity immediately, but the decision also aligned with the ancient memories he had witnessed among the battlefield's bone mountains. Instead of leaving, he expanded soul perception and ran toward the nearest rift as dark figures poured into areas where contestants were already scattered. His 1,000-meter awareness mapped monsters, terrain, professionals, and cultists, giving him a hunting radius far beyond what ordinary vision could support. The first emergency target was a contestant surrounded by several followers who had borrowed alien power and could overwhelm normal professionals at the same level. Lyn Shu reached the fight, healed the wounded contestant, then eliminated the cultists before they could understand why. Another contestant moved like a patrol veteran. The rescued professional initially addressed him like an officer, only noticing the contestant badge after the danger had already disappeared. Lyn Shu sent him towards safer allies and continued alone, because stopping to escort every survivor would reduce the number of people he could reach in time. Monitoring staff noticed the pattern. He seemed to wander, then abruptly accelerated whenever soul perception detected another cluster of hostile movement. Chairman Jiang Hian described the behavior accurately as hunting and decided the system should support it rather than force Lyn Shu into ordinary patrol routes. Central monitoring synchronized cultist locations directly to his interface, giving him broader battlefield intelligence and formal responsibility for outer perimeter clearing. The new map turned soul perception into a navigation tool, letting Lyn Shu combine official positions with his own local awareness for much faster interception. He used the information to reach endangered contestants before normal patrol teams, earning soul fragments while steadily reducing the outer ring of hostile movement. One distant fight was too far for Ice Spike, so Lyn Shu activated Undying, grabbed the heavy Necromancer greatsword, and threw it across the battlefield. The weapon carried enough force to interrupt a cultist attack and save a group of contestants before Lyn Shu himself reached the location. Those survivors struggled to lift the great sword afterward. Discovering the object Lyn Shu had thrown from extreme range was simply extraordinarily heavy. When he arrived, Lyn Shu retrieved the weapon casually, making his physical strength look even more absurd beside the mage robes he still wore. Mutated followers attacked in a coordinated group, but frost domains slowed their movement and exposed bodies that expected alien transformations to overwhelm normal humans. After throwing the sword, Lyn Shu used his staff as a melee weapon, stacking Undying stats with Overlord's armor penetration against enemies at close range. Monitoring staff could barely reconcile the footage with his career file, because the supposed mage was defeating enhanced professionals through direct physical exchanges. Xiao, Tianlong, and other talented contestants recognized Lyn Shu and had to reconsider every assumption they held about the difference between mage and warrior builds. Lyn Shu treated their confusion as irrelevant, collected soul fragments, and moved toward the next red markers before the rescued group finished processing what happened. At one rift, he found another dead contestant, closed the victim's eyes, and used soul perception to judge the unstable energy beyond the opening. Rather than enter blindly, he followed the edge until combat sounds revealed more professionals on the same perimeter. A rescued mage warned that a larger engagement was happening north, where a patrol team had already taken heavy casualties against a dense cult force. Lyn Shu sent the survivors south, through territory he had already cleared, then ignored his outer perimeter assignment. Long enough to inspect the core battle, headquarters saw him heading toward a cluster of more than 50 hostile markers and placed his feed on a dedicated monitoring screen. Jiang Hian knew one contestant should not decide a large patrol engagement, but Lyn Shu's previous trail of kills justified watching before ordering him back. The local patrol commander, Qin Rui, had not seen that footage and assumed the approaching young man was another privileged contestant requiring protection. Shinru positioned Lyn Shu behind experienced fighters, warned him not to act like a hero, and assigned another officer to keep him out of danger. Lyn Shu accepted the order because group combat required coordination, and he had no reason to prove himself before understanding how the patrol planned to fight. The cultists then launched a major assault, using mutated bodies and alien abilities, strong enough to break armor and overwhelm experienced professionals. When one wounded patrolman was about to die, Lyn Shu stepped between them and blocked a full-strength claw with the Necromancer Greatsword. The mutated attacker expected to crush him, but the weapon barely moved because Undying and Lyn Shu's balanced attributes made his physical strength exceptional. Lyn Shu judged the pressure as noticeable but manageable, then answered with healing, frost, and a direct sword counter. Instead of retreating behind the patrol line, Radiant Shroud's Overflow damaged the mutant, while Frost Domain locked its feet, preventing the creature from escaping the close-range exchange it started. Overlord's Disarm triggered when Lyn Shu swung, increasing damage and piercing defense because both his health and strength exceeded the target's. The fully mutated follower died within seconds, flipping the emotional balance of a battle where patrol officers had been struggling simply to hold position. Chin Rui immediately used the opening, ordering a counterattack as Lyn Shu drove into the cult formations and shattered its attack rhythm. Once the officers stopped protecting him and started following his pressure, their experience became useful rather than an obstacle to his movement. Lyn Shu acted as the spearhead, while patrol fighters contained survivors, covered flanks, and prevented enemies from escaping towards scattered contestants. The Rift Zone battle that looked close to collapse turned decisively, with hostile numbers dropping faster every time Lyn Shu reached another concentrated group. Shinru eventually understood why central monitoring had sent the teenager forward, instead of keeping him in a safe sector with other tournament participants. After more than 20 followers fell, Lyn Shu still asked whether other battles remained nearby, sounding disappointed when told the current area was nearly clear. Chinri pointed toward other rifts, and Lyn Shu immediately asked for directions, rather than returning to the tournament route or protecting his ranking. For nearly 2 hours, he moved between patrol engagements until the main cult force around the Rift Zone had been eliminated. The surviving officers were exhausted, while Lyn Shu stood at the edge of a rift studying the red energy beyond it instead of celebrating. Chinru explained that specialized professionals would manage the rift itself and told Lyn Shu he was probably the last contestant still operating that deep. Returning to headquarters, Lyn Shu learned that the monitoring center had recorded not only the cult battles, but also Old Mo's assassination attempt. Chairman Jiang Hian invited him into a private conversation and asked directly about the unusual human threat that had appeared during the trial. Lyn Shu explained the level 30 assassin was not a cultist and named Li Ya as the businessman behind the contract. Jiang Hian already knew much of the story because he had reviewed Lyn Shu's file after the historic team trial clear. He listed the blocked certification, factory scheme, tracker planted during tournament entry, and assassination footage, making clear the conflict was fully documented. Li Hao's lethal actions were treated as malicious intent that justified Lyn Shu's self-defense, removing the ambiguity the Li family might later exploit. Old Mo's recorded words connected the contract to Li Ya, finally providing hard evidence strong enough to overcome the influence that protected him locally. Jiang Hian asked Lyn Shu how he wanted the matter handled, but the young professionals focused on preventing Li Ya from using power or connections again. The chairman contacted Mayor Sun Lion directly and ordered an immediate arrest using complete battlefield footage supplied by Continental Monitoring. Sun Lion recognized the name at once, having already warned Li Ya after earlier interference with Lyn Shu's certification and family. This time, there was no missing camera footage, frightened witness, or ambiguous paperwork. Qinglan Continent possessed clear evidence of attempted assassination. City officers moved on Li Ya's company with specialized restraints, designed to suppress professional abilities. If a high-level suspect resisted arrest, Li Ya considered fighting, but understood violent resistance against armed officials would create authority to kill him on the spot. Facing Mayor Sun Lion and a prepared team, he surrendered rather than gamble against professionals who had come with both evidence and overwhelming legal backing. The arrest spread through local news as authorities froze Li Ya's assets and opened investigations into every associate involved in the attempted killing. Public statements also connected the case to alien believer interference around the tournament. making the consequences far larger than a private family dispute. Li Jianguo's earlier misconduct, Li Hao's tracker, and the factory pressure now formed part of a continuous pattern instead of separate incidents. The entire strategy that once made Lyn Shu feel powerless collapsed because one recorded battlefield crime finally gave higher authorities the evidence they needed. Zhang Hian then offered something more valuable than revenge, an invitation to the special government unit mentioned in the emergency mission. The organization could handle internal oversight, investigation, external suppression, and situations where ordinary bureaucracy moved too slowly for high-risk professionals. Lyn Shu accepted immediately because the conflict with Li Ya had shown both sides of the law. Rules protected the weak, but they could also limit rapid action. He understood that borrowing a chairman's authority was not the same as possessing his own, and long-term security required a position with legitimate responsibility. The invitation therefore represented independence, not permission to ignore law, giving Lyn Shu a formal path to confront threats stronger than local administrative systems. Zhang Hian followed the offer with tangible rewards, leading him into the association archives where soul fragments could be exchanged for restricted skills and equipment. Lyn Shu saw resource unavailable on normal markets, including high-ranked abilities and rare attribute equipment that made ordinary dungeon rewards look modest. After comparing options, he selected the S-rank Frost Dominator because it matched Frost Nova and could strengthen every major Frost effect in his existing build. Frost Dominator reduced cooldowns and amplified damage or negative effects for Frost skills beneath its rank, making it an ideal foundation for another fusion. Lyn Shu planned to sacrifice Frost Nova into it, preserving useful effects while opening a Svatanpeth without consuming an additional permanent skill slot. Zhang Hian was surprised he chose a mage ability, after the individual tournament had made Lyn Shu's close combat strength far more visually memorable. Lyn Shu answered that warrior combat was only a hobby, and mage remained his real profession, a statement the chairman found difficult to take completely seriously. The joke hit a real tactical advantage. Future enemies might prepare for one combat style and discover a second fully developed system after closing distance. Zhang Hian protected that information by restricting access to Lyn Shu's battle footage, ensuring random competitors could not study every unusual interaction freely. With the tournament finished, Lyn Shu now possessed championship results, special unit admission, rare resources, and official backing strong enough to reshape his future. More importantly, the people who tried to steal his first career certificate were no longer deciding whether he deserved a path at all. Qinglan Continent did not hide Lyn Shu's achievements after the tournament, officially recognizing his dungeon ranking, team championship, individual championship, and professional honors. Zhang Hian believed a young professional with real accomplishments should not pretend to be insignificant simply because attention might create future pressure. That advice changed how local officials treated Lyn Shu, because he now arrived with titles backed by continental authority rather than only rumors from dungeon screens. When he returned to the municipal building that evening, even the gate guards recognized the dark robe and violet cloak associated with the tournament champion. Mayor Sun Lyn was already waiting with a thick case file covering Li Ya, his employees, financial connections, and everyone tied to the assassination attempt. 13 people had been detained, bank accounts frozen, and related assets locked, while investigators separated direct crimes from ordinary business relationships. Sun Lyn offered Lyn Shu the file and asked whether he wanted anything added. But Lyn Shu refused to pretend he understood legal procedure better than officials. He chose cooperation over personal micromanagement, telling the mayor to handle prosecution according to law while he focused on facts only he could provide. That response surprised Sun Lyn because many newly powerful professionals became obsessed with controlling every consequence once their enemies finally looked vulnerable. Lyn Shu had one personal request instead. He wanted to see Li Ya directly before the larger case moved beyond anything the businessman could influence. A government car took him to the detention center. The warden had already been warned that the visitor carried backing from Qinglan headquarters. Li Cha sat behind reinforced glass in a prison uniform, with professional suppressing restraints replacing the authority and expensive image he once displayed. The businessman first tried to preserve pride by claiming his greatest mistake had been hesitating when Lyn Shu was still level 1. He argued that one decisive assassination immediately after awakening could have ended everything before dungeon records, mayoral attention, or continental officials appeared. Lyn Shu rejected that revision of history because Li Ya had been afraid even then of the consequences attached to killing an SSS-ranked professional. Instead of acting openly, Li Ya had used parents, paperwork, school influence, and financial pressure, precisely because he could not accept the exposure of direct violence. Once Mayor Sun intervened, that hesitation grew stronger, forcing Li Ya to watch Lyn Shu clear dungeons while the window for quiet suppression kept shrinking. Lyn Shu explained that he knew the Li family would eventually strike, though he had never known exactly where or when the decisive attempt would come. His answer had therefore been relentless growth, making himself more visible and more dangerous until the enemy felt waiting any longer was impossible. The team trial pushed that pressure past a threshold because Qinglan Continent finally noticed Lyn Shu, leaving Li Ya with almost no future opportunity. Planting the tracker and hiring Old Mo seemed safe only because the Astral battlefield offered permanent death and countless plausible causes. That confidence became the fatal mistake. Since national monitoring recorded the tracker, assassin, patrol witnesses, and the conversation exposing Li Ya's role, Lyn Shu then placed the Black Gold Prison Warden invitation, where Li Ya could see it, revealing that the conflict had moved beyond ordinary city politics. Li Ya recognized the blue-faced Fang Demon seal immediately and understood that prison wardens possessed authority his business connections could not easily obstruct. Lyn Shu admitted he was still learning the unit's exact powers, but Zhang Qian had already explained its role in suppressing aliens and purging internal threats. The invitation destroyed Li Ya's remaining hope that serving time alone would preserve the networks and influence waiting for him. Outside, Lyn Shu told him the real beginning of the disaster was Li Hao's greed, which pulled Li Jianguo and then the entire family into escalating retaliation. He placed responsibility on Li Ya as well, arguing that a father who encouraged ruthless escalation had helped destroy his own brother, son, and organization. Li Ya demanded that consequences stop with him, but Lyn Shu refused to promise that people who knowingly participated would be protected for emotional symmetry. The meeting ended without celebration, because seeing a former threat powerless behind glass did not erase the fear and pressure Lyn Shu's family had already endured. Outside, the night felt strangely ordinary compared with the speed at which a level 50 professional and major corporation had lost control of their future. Only a week earlier, Lyn Shu had worried about impossible compensation his parents could never pay. Now Li Ya waited in detention under continental evidence. The contrast left him more reflective than triumphant, especially after watching one phone call from Zhang Qian move machinery far beyond his own level. That experience reinforced a lesson the chairman had already given him. Borrowed influence solved problems, but only personal strength and position created lasting independence. During the ride home, Sun Chunhua messaged that Lyn Shu's mother had reheated dinner several times while waiting for him to return. The small domestic message pulled Lyn Shu away from politics faster than any official speech, reminding him why surviving and growing had mattered from the beginning. At home, his father poured beer, and his mother carried food to the table, creating a quiet family scene after days dominated by public crises. Sun Chunhua and Sona soon arrived with additional food and drinks, turning the tense evening into the same casual gathering the family had begun enjoying. During dinner, Lyn Shu showed them the black gold invitation and asked what the Prison Warden Bureau actually represented. Inside the Great Xia government, Sun Chunhua explained that special units existed outside normal professional organizations, each handling work too sensitive, dangerous, or politically complicated for ordinary departments. The Sin Reaper Bureau focused on internal traitors, while gatekeepers remained stationed near astral boundaries for long rotations defending dangerous frontier zones. The Celestial Machine Pavilion handled research and held enormous status despite doing less direct fighting, because knowledge shaped every future battlefield advantage. Shadow Guards protected the highest officials, and prison wardens combined external explorations with suppression missions requiring unusually versatile combat professionals. These organizations were filled with exceptional talent, so an SSS awakening that dominated one city would become ordinary competition once placed among national elites. Sona revealed that she had received the same Warden invitation after her own performance and kills during the emergency invasion. Sun Chunhua admitted his natural rank was lower, but family connections had secured a recommendation slot that still required him to survive the unit's selection. Sona teased him for previously wanting another for special unit, while Sun Chunhua insisted prison warden work had always been his real ambition. The joking helped Lyn Shu understand that recommendation was not automatic acceptance. Talented candidates still had to prove they belonged among other selected prodigies. Conversation then moved beyond domestic politics because Sona believed Lyn Shu had advanced too quickly to absorb basic information about the wider world. Lyn Shu agreed, recognizing that constant pressure from the Li family had kept his attention locked on local survival rather than geography or international systems. Sona explained that humanity extended beyond the Great Sia government, including the Star Federation and populations living inside fragment worlds rather than normal territory. Some fragment societies existed within instances or astral regions, meaning prison warden missions could involve negotiations, conflicts, and cultures completely outside ordinary city life. Most human or neutral groups maintained workable relations with Great Sia, so the central threat remained the alien races connected to the battlefield invasion. Native aliens included beasts, demons, and non-human civilizations, while corrupted aliens were often humans transformed after exposure to hostile alien power. Corrupted followers retained original professional abilities and gained additional alien traits, explaining why cultists in the tournament could exceed ordinary fighters of similar level. Lyn Shu had seen those transformations firsthand, but hearing the categories organized clearly made the world's larger conflict easier to understand. The discussion also changed how he viewed future progression. Since city rankings meant little compared with battlefields involving nations, fragment races, and alien civilizations, Sun Chunhua warned that prison wardens frequently interacted with exactly those complicated environments, rather than say running dungeons and arresting obvious criminals. After the siblings left, Lyn Shu finally told his parents the conflict with the Li family had ended through arrests, convictions, and official restoration of their rights. Their work seniority and social benefits had been reinstated, and the municipal government will no longer treat the barricaded factory liability as their responsibility. Lyn Shu told them they could return to work if they wanted, but they no longer needed salaries because he could support the household himself. His mother started crying, not because the result was bad, but because she understood their son had fought through danger they could barely imagine. His father blamed himself for being unable to provide the kind of backing other talented students received from wealthy or powerful families. Lyn Shu rejected that guilt and reminded him that food, clothes, education, stability, and years of quiet sacrifice had already given him what mattered. Although Lyn Shu carried memories from another life, 18 years inside this family had made those parents real rather than temporary people surrounding a transmigrator. He remembered his father returning from factory night shifts before dawn and the ordinary exhaustion that had financed every stage of his childhood. That history was exactly why threats against them had hurt more deeply than losing a subsidy or being mocked by classmates. Lyn Shu told his parents they were not a burden. They were one of the clearest reasons he wanted enough strength to stop others controlling his choices. The statement finally released emotions the family had avoided during the crisis, leaving all three sitting together without needing to solve another problem immediately. His mother soon shifted back into practical mode and began packing clothes for the upcoming trip to Qinglan continent. Lyn Shu needed little luggage because professional equipment lived mostly inside storage spaces, but she still treated the journey like her son, leaving home normally. His father asked questions about the special unit without pretending to understand every danger, choosing support instead of adding another layer of fear. Lyn Shu promised only what he could honestly guarantee. He would keep training, avoid pointless risks, and return whenever missions allowed. The next day passed with preparation, equipment checks, health accumulation, and review of the skills he had not yet fully integrated. Life Echo continued quietly, increasing his maximum health, proving again that ordinary hours remained part of his progression, even without a dungeon timer running. Frost Dominator waited for a future fusion, while Undying, Radiant Shroud, Life Shield, Soul Perception, and Overlord's Disarm already covered major combat roles. Lyn Shu deliberately avoided upgrading everything at once, because high-rank skills consumed enormous health and future unknown abilities might deserve that reserve more. Sun Chunhua arrived as promised to collect Lyn Shu, with Sona joining them for the trip to the regional prison warden branch. Leaving Joning City felt different from earlier dungeon travel, because Lyn Shu was no longer trying to escape local obstruction. He was entering a larger professional world, Qinglan's urban scale and association infrastructure made Zhoning look smaller, reinforcing how narrow Lyn Shu's perspective had been during the first chaotic week. The prison warden branch stood in the northern district, a wide black building, identified only by a code rather than a public sign. Two guards at the entrance already felt stronger than ordinary young professionals, signaling that even security positions here were filled by serious combatants. Sun Chunhua parked underground and led the group upstairs, where selected teenagers from multiple cities were already waiting in the lobby. Different uniforms and badges showed they came from across the continent, but almost every carried the confidence of someone who had dominated peers back home. The sign-in roster confirmed the level of competition, with most candidates holding SSS careers and even the lowest ranks still sitting among exceptional awakenings. Sun Chunhua quietly identified several famous prodigies whose families had accumulated skills, equipment, and training methods over generations. Xiao Wuji represented a rival city as an SSS swordsman, while another candidate specialized in shadow assassination with family inheritance behind his development. Gao Yuan, grandson of a high-ranking official, carried an SSS mage career and the resources expected from someone raised inside professional leadership circles. Lyn Shu listened without showing much reaction, because titles meant less after fighting cultists who transformed beyond normal career rankings. Still, he respected that each candidate likely concealed abilities unavailable in public files, making this selection more unpredictable than a dungeon leaderboard. The room also contained candidates who had earned recommendations instead of direct invitations, proof that connections could open a door without guaranteeing the person survived assessment. Soon Chunhua fell into that category and openly admitted he would need to prove himself against people whose base talents exceeded his own rank. Sona faced less uncertainty because her SSS Frost Empress and emergency combat record already matched the type of candidate the Bureau wanted. Lyn Shu's own background was stranger. An SSS sacrificer on paper, multiple historic records, and abilities officials still could not fit inside one standard category. That ambiguity attracted curious looks, but not immediate confrontation because most candidates had only partial information about how he actually fought. One swordsman eventually approached with the kind of competitive confidence common among prodigies used to testing status through direct physical pressure. The encounter began as a handshake, but quickly became a strength contest when the other young professional tried to squeeze Lyn Shu's hand. Lyn Shu felt the challenge immediately and answered without raising his voice, allowing the opponent to discover that the supposed mage's grip was much stronger. The pressure distorted the challenger's hand before he finally demanded release, turning a childish dominance test into the first public surprise inside the branch lobby. What followed would show every candidate that Zhoning City's famous sacrificer had not arrived merely because a championship score looked impressive on paper. Yi Chu refused to stop after losing the strength contest and summoned a shield, turning a petty handshake challenge into an actual combat technique. He charged behind red light, expecting professional momentum to overwhelm someone known publicly as a mage-oriented sacrificer. Lyn Shu caught the shield with one hand and drove it into the floor before the charge could move him backward. The impact cracked tiles and left Yi Chu staring at a defensive technique that had been physically suppressed instead of dodged or counterspelled. Lyn Shu released the damaged hand, then kicked the warrior across the lobby before Yi Chu could reorganize for another attack. The SSS-rank challenger crashed into the service area, while other prodigies watched a supposed mage dominate a warrior through raw physical statistics. Because most candidates had only recently reached level 20, class-based stat gaps were still developing. But the difference Lyn Shu showed remained extreme. Lyn Shu told Yi Chu that swagger without enough strength was meaningless and treated the captured shield as payment for starting the confrontation. He tossed the S-rank shield to Sun Chunhua, whose merchant instincts immediately returned, as he considered how quickly such equipment could sell. Yi Chu wanted to protest, yet losing publicly to a mage made asking for the shield back even more humiliating than remaining silent. An official prison warden finally emerged from the corridor before the argument could restart, wearing a dark gold badge and an almost sleepy expression. The man introduced himself as Song Yen and mocked the defeated warrior for failing to beat someone everyone had assumed was a mage. Yi Chu swallowed his anger because Song Yen's status inside the organization carried more weight than rivalry among incoming candidates. Song Yen had actually expected some arrogant newcomer to challenge him, giving the Bureau an easy example for putting the group in place. Instead, Lyn Shu had already delivered that lesson before staff arrived, leaving Xiong Yen more amused than irritated by the damaged lobby. The assessor then reminded everyone that their regional reputations meant little inside an organization where exceptional professionals were the normal population. 3 candidates would be eliminated during the internal assessment, regardless of who recommended them, how famous their families were, or what rank they awakened. The warning hit recommended entrants hardest because an invitation or political connection could open the building but could not force the Bureau to keep them. Song Yen scheduled the first formal test for 8 the next morning and warned that arriving late would cause immediate disqualification. After he left, the lobby broke into smaller conversations as candidates recalculated how much of their public confidence they wanted to carry into assessment. Yichu retrieved himself, glared at Sun Chunhua holding the shield, and walked away, rather than restart a fight he had already lost. His reaction confirmed the strength demonstration had achieved more than an argument could, because every other candidate now knew Lyn Shu's close combat was real. A different young man approached immediately afterward, short, gentle-looking, and wearing black-framed glasses, instead of an aggressive expression. Sun Chunhua identified him as Jiang Ming, an SS-rank sacrificer from Loning City, and the only other person there sharing Lyn Shu's profession family. Jiang Ming noticed the recent handshake disaster and clarified before touching anyone that he wanted conversation, rather than another contest. He introduced himself openly, then released Lyn Shu's hand almost comically fast once the greeting was complete. Jiang Ming already knew about the Inferno Ghost Fortress record and admitted the 24,700-point score sounded impossible for a sacrificer. He had assumed Lyn Shu must have burned away most of his future until seeing the physical strength displayed against Yi Chu. Instead of demanding Lyn Shu's secret, Jiang Ming offered part of his own talent information first to establish that the conversation was genuine. His sacrifice did not consume life force directly. It traded equipment durability for power, making the personal cost far safer than ordinary sacrificer methods. Even with that favorable talent, Jiang Ming admitted he could not reproduce Lyn Shu's Hell Clear and considered Nightmare difficulty uncertain. The admission was not self-deprecation, but professional comparison, showing how unusual Fate Sacrificer's results looked even to another strong sacrificer. Jiang Ming seemed genuinely pleased to find someone from the same rare profession instead of treating shared specialization as another reason for rivalry. A phone call from his sister interrupted the conversation, and he left almost as quickly as he had approached, after promising they could talk later. Lyn Shu found the interaction strangely abrupt because the newcomer revealed useful personal information, made friends, and disappeared without asking for anything. Sun Chunhua told him not to overanalyze it, joking that geniuses often behaved strangely and rare sacrificers had even fewer peers to speak with. With the lobby settling down, Lyn Shu, Sun Chunhua, and Sona separated toward assigned quarters to prepare for the next morning's assessment. Lyn Shu used the quiet room to review every major gain accumulated since the awakening ceremony, rather than waste the night thinking about Yi Chu. His career panel now identified him as the EX rank Fate Sacrificer, rather than the SSS career the public still believed he possessed. He had reached level 21 after completing class progression requirements and receiving attributes from continued combat, teed combat, and tournament rewards. Base maximum health had climbed beyond 200,000, a number produced by life echo, level growth, undying, and repeated rebuilding after sacrifices. Mana remained comparatively modest, reinforcing why efficient casting, life diversion, and cooldown management still mattered despite the absurd vitality reserve. Strength, agility, and spirit had all risen into ranges far above an ordinary professional at the same level. Lyn Shu distributed new free attributes evenly because Undying rewarded broad statistics, and his actual combat style used magic movement and melee together. Earlier, he might have specialized completely, but mixed development now created more value than maximizing one number while leaving another system behind. Life Echo's growth rate had changed as his constitution improved because stronger lungs naturally reduced the number of breaths taken during ordinary rest. At the beginning, deliberate breathing could add roughly 30,000 health in a day, while his current passive pace was closer to 20,000. Combat still increased breathing frequencies, so dangerous activity unintentionally accelerated Life Echo even while other abilities were consuming health. Lyn Shu no longer thought of that reserve primarily as survivability. Maximum health had become the currency used to purchase permanent skill evolution. His filled skill set included EX Sacrifice, Enhanced Healing, Soul Perception, Life Shield, Life Diversion, Toughness, and several high-rank passives. Undying remained maxed at SSS rank, providing huge stat amplification and the emergency protection that made fatal burst attacks far less threatening. Radiant Shroud covered healing and cleansing, while its overflow effect allowed support magic to remain part of Lyn Shu's offensive rotation. Soul Perception supplied battlefield information across enormous areas, one of the main reasons he survived ambushes and located endangered contestants during the invasion. Life Shield turned health into layered defense and punished attackers when they successfully broke the protection they were trying to overcome. Life Diversion solved resource problems by converting vitality into mana, keeping long fights from becoming a simple contest between damage and a small mana bar. EX Toughness accelerated recovery, allowing the huge maximum pool to refill meaningfully between encounters instead of existing only as unused empty capacity. Overlord's Disarm added passive damage and defense penetration whenever Lyn Shu's vitality or strength exceeded whatever target he attacked. The interaction with Undying meant those checks activated against opponents who would normally be far too strong for a young mage to physically challenge. Frost Dominator remained the major unfinished project because Lyn Shu had acquired it after the tournament and had not yet spent enough health on evolution. His existing Ice Spike still hit hard, but the cooldown made it less useful as a sustained primary attack once enemies survived beyond one burst. Lyn Shu therefore opened the Sacrifice interface and selected Frost Dominator as the next ability worth a major investment. The system displayed health requirements for base advancement, maximum mastery, and an eventual EX breakthrough, large enough to matter even with Life Echo. It also detected compatibility with Frost Nova, offering a fusion that would preserve useful advanced effects while rebuilding them inside the stronger S-rank skill. That confirmation proved the earlier Water Arrow experiment was not a one-time exception. Sacrifice could systematically recycle developed abilities into better foundations. Lyn Shu chose Fusion because carrying two overlapping Frost skills would waste a slot and divide future enhancement costs. Frost Nova disappeared as an independent ability, but its control structure became part of Frost Dominator, rather than vanishing from the build. The new Ice Spike gained far higher damage, making the spell relevant again against opponents whose health had outgrown the earlier version. Its cooldown dropped sharply, allowing repeated single-target pressure instead of one opening shot, followed by long reliance on melee. Each hit also applied a frost mark that reduced enemy movement, giving Lyn Shu another way to control distance without depending on terrain. Frost Domain expanded to roughly a kilometer, increasing both continuous damage and the slow applied to every hostile target remaining inside. Enemies staying in the domain long enough became frozen automatically, turning sustained presence around Lyn Shu into an escalating control penalty. Targets carrying frost marks suffered even more once frozen, linking the single target spell and area field into one deliberate combat sequence. That synergy meant Ice Spike was no longer just damage. Landing it prepared the target for stronger punishment from the domain surrounding the battlefield. Frost Dominator also improved Lyn Shu's own movement while active, preventing powerful enemies from simply escaping the control zone before the freeze condition developed. Mana costs and cooldowns for Frost abilities were reduced inside the domain, allowing the entire system to sustain itself more efficiently during long fights. The most flexible new effect allowed Lyn Shu to shape frost throughout the controlled area, instead of relying only on predefined spell geometry. He could raise ice walls, create spikes, alter routes, form traps, and rebuild pieces of terrain according to tactical need. For someone already strong enough to fight physically, terrain control created angles for melee, ranged attacks, defense, and forced movement at the same time. Lyn Shu recognized that the skill had crossed from simple elemental damage into true battlefield dominion, exactly the versatility his mixed build valued. He closed the panel only after confirming the fusion had preserved important earlier effects, trading away control for raw numbers. Attention then moved to Overlord's Disarm, the S-rank passive obtained from continental rewards before the individual tournament. The passive compared Lyn Shu's health against the target whenever he dealt damage and granted a substantial bonus when his vitality was higher. A separate strength comparison determined whether his attacks ignored part of the opponent's defense, making physical statistics relevant, even during spell damage. Most professionals could not guarantee either condition against elite enemies, because specializing in one attribute usually meant conceding the other comparison. Lyn Shu's build was different. Life Echo made health extraordinary, while Undying and Balanced Allocation pushed strength far beyond standard mage expectations. Against many opponents, both checks therefore activated together, producing amplified damage and defense penetration, without any additional casting action. Because the effect was passive, it occupied no active skill slot, and required no mana, timing, or separate combat decision once learned. That efficiency made Overlord's Disarm more valuable to Lyn Shu than flashy abilities that would compete with Frost Dominator for limited active space. He also remembered how often the passive had triggered in the Astral battlefield when his staff or greatsword hit corrupted followers directly. The performance that shocked monitoring staff had not been random strength. It was a predictable result of several permanent systems, multiplying together. Even ranged ice spikes benefited when the relevant checks succeeded, meaning the warrior-themed reward strengthened the mage side of his build too. Lyn Shu's current strategy increasingly depended on these cross-career interactions, rather than any single label printed beside his profession. That made secrecy easier in one sense, because outsiders kept searching for one hidden skill when the real advantage came from stacked mechanics. It also made future assessment harder, because an evaluator prepared for magic might discover overwhelming close combat after forcing their way through frost. Someone prepared for his physical strength could instead be trapped inside a kilometer-wide domain where movement, terrain, and cooldowns all favored Lyn Shu. The Prison Warden internal trial would be the first environment where he faced many peers selected, precisely because their own talents broke ordinary expectations. Lyn Shu therefore treated the branch confrontation with Yi Chu as useful information, not proof that every incoming candidate would be equally easy. He expected family inheritances, unusual careers, hidden skills, and assessment rules designed by veterans who had already seen countless regional prodigies. Rather than stay awake chasing hypothetical opponents, he finished reviewing the build and prepared to arrive at the training grounds before Xiong Yan's deadline. The boy who once needed school permission for a career trial was now waiting for an elite government unit to decide which challenge came next. Alone in his room, Lyn Shu opened the complete status panel before the prison warden's assessment. The panel showed level 21, with all required class trials already completed. His maximum health had reached roughly 220,000 before the next major sacrifice. Mana remained only a few hundred points, still tiny beside the life reserve powering his career. Strength had reached 174 before temporary amplification effects were counted. Agility sat at 176, keeping his movement competitive with dedicated close combat professionals. Spirit reached 150, supporting both frost damage and the speed of terrain reconstruction. Those values were space statistics, not the temporary multipliers available through Undying. His maxed SSS passive could amplify the entire physical and magical foundation when necessary. Luck also appeared among the panel's special attributes after equipment and reward progression. Natural health regeneration had climbed dramatically after Lyn Shu's strength and toughness. 7 skill slots were already occupied, making future fusion more valuable than simply collecting abilities. SSS-rank Sacrifice remained the engine connecting every other part of the build. His maxed SSS defensive passive protected against lethal situations while multiplying core statistics. EX healing supplied recovery, cleansing, and offensive overflow, without requiring a separate support role. Soul Perception provided information, tracking, and battlefield awareness far beyond ordinary sight. Life Shield turned vitality into protection and punished enemies who successfully broke it. Life Diversion converted the same enormous health pool into mana whenever sustained casting demanded more resources. Toughness accelerated recovery between those health expenditures, keeping the resource cycle from stalling. Overlord's Disarm added passive damage whenever Lyn Shu's unusual statistics beat the target's comparisons. After level 20, Lyn Shu received free attribute points with each new level. An SSS career granted 15 points per level, enough to shape development noticeably over time. He divided those points evenly instead of concentrating everything into a single traditional mage statistic. Before undying, extreme specialization might have produced better short-term numbers. After undying, balance growth multiplied across several systems and supported both spellcasting and melee. Lyn Shu also tracked life echo more carefully as his constitution improved. Stronger lungs meant he breathed less often, while resting than he had immediately after awakening. Early deliberate breathing could add around 30,000 maximum health during a full day. His current passive pace had fallen closer to 20,000 per day without special effort. Combat partially reversed that slowdown because exertion naturally increased breathing frequency. Even the reduced rate remained extraordinary, when every new health point could later become enhancement currency. Lyn Shu therefore valued health differently from every ordinary tank or healer. It was defense, survival mana fuel, skill fuel, and future progression stored in one number. The stronger he became, the more expensive the abilities worth upgrading also became. That scaling kept life echo relevant, instead of allowing early health growth to trivialize every future cost. His attention settled on Frost Dominator, the strongest unfinished skill in the current build. During the individual tournament, Ice Spike still dealt useful burst damage against ordinary targets. Its cooldown, however, made it increasingly weak as a primary attack against tougher professionals. Lyn Shu had compensated through melee and other abilities, rather than fixing the Frost system immediately. With the Prison Warden assessment approaching, leaving that obvious weakness unaddressed no longer made sense. He opened Sacrifice and selected the S-rank Frost Dominator as the enhancement target. The interface separated the cost for basic advancement from mastery and the eventual EX breakthrough. Reaching EX rank required 40,000 maximum health in total. 10,000 covered the base mastery stage before the final breakthrough. Another 30,000 completed the transformation beyond the normal S-rank ceiling. The interface then detected Frost Nova as a compatible fusion component. Fusion would preserve Frost Nova's advanced effects instead of simply erasing the earlier investment. It would also add new enhancement based on Frost Dominator's stronger foundation. Lyn Shu noticed the Sacrifice interface was becoming better at identifying compatible skill paths automatically. That suggested his talent's functionality was developing alongside his own level and experience. The improvement reduced the amount of blind experimentation required for every future fusion. Lyn Shu confirmed the transaction without changing his earlier decision. His maximum health immediately began falling as the sacrifice cost was deducted. The reserve dropped from roughly 220,000 toward 180,000. 40,000 maximum health disappeared in a single enhancement. Frost Nova's icon shattered into icy blue fragments across the interface. Those fragments flowed directly into the Frost Dominator symbol, instead of vanishing. The rebuilt icon became a hexagonal ice crystal, marked with dark golden patterns. A deeper crack appeared through its center, visually separating the evolved form from the original skill. The system confirmed Frost Dominator had crossed from S-rank into EX rank. It also confirmed the successful fusion of the earlier Frost Nova ability. The first rebuilt function was Frost Spike, Lyn Shu's direct single-target frost attack. Its damage rose to 20,000, plus additional scaling from his spirit attribute. The cooldown dropped to roughly 1.5 seconds. Every successful hit now applied a Frost Mark to the target. Frost Mark reduced movement speed by 40% for a short duration. That slow created a direct setup for the much larger Frost Domain around Lyn Shu. Frost Domain expanded until it covered a radius of roughly 1,000 meters. Enemies inside continuously suffered frost damage while remaining under heavy movement reduction. The domain's slow increased to 60% before individual resistance was considered. Staying inside for more than 2 seconds triggered automatic freezing. A target carrying Frost Mark became even more vulnerable once that freeze activated. Frozen enemies with the mark received double damage during the control window. Frost Spike and Frost Domain therefore stopped functioning, like two unrelated spells. One established the mark, while the other converted continued exposure into a stronger punishment sequence. The third function, Frost Dominion, changed Lyn Shu himself while the domain remained active. His movement speed increased by 30% inside his own controlled battlefield. Frost skill mana costs were cut in half, while Frost Dominion remained active. Their cooldowns were also halved, allowing far denser casting sequences than before. The combined reductions transformed Ice Spike from occasional support into a repeatable primary attack. The final effect gave Lyn Shu free control over frost, already existing inside the domain. He could reconstruct terrain according to intent, rather than relying only on fixed spell shapes. Ice walls could appear where he needed cover or forced movement. Spikes could be formed as traps instead of fired only as direct projectiles. Frozen routes could redirect opponents toward angles favorable to his next attack. Terrain shaping speed scaled with spirit, giving that attribute another reason to remain balanced. For Lyn Shu, this control mattered especially because his physical statistics were already powerful. A battlefield he could reshape created melee openings as easily as ranged ones. The evolved Frost system now combined damage, slowing, freezing, movement, efficiency, and terrain control. Lyn Shu regarded that versatility as true dominion rather than another simple elemental upgrade. He then reopened Overlord's Disarm to review why the passive continued performing so well. When Lyn Shu's health exceeded the target's, every damaging attack gained an additional 50% damage. When his strength exceeded the target's, the same attack ignored 30% of its defense. Ordinary professionals rarely maintained both advantages against elite opponents at the same time. Lyn Shu usually did, because Life Echo dominated health comparisons, while Undying supported extraordinary strength. That meant spells, weapon attacks, and even improvised melee could trigger the passive without extra mana. Overlord's Disarm also consumed no active slot, preserving space for the abilities needing direct control. The final build no longer resembled the doomed sacrificer described in school textbooks. Every breath created future resources, and every sacrifice could turn ordinary skills into tools that ignored expected career limits. Lyn Shu entered the prison warden selection with an EX rank path built from the career. Everyone had tried to force him to surrender,